Hey guys, tonight we begin with the bizarre imprisonment of the man in the iron mask. Secret orders, locked doors, and a prisoner whose name no one dared to say. So while you're getting comfortable, feel free to tap like and subscribe if this kind of calm, late-night history is your thing. And I'd love to know where you're listening from tonight. Drop a comment with your city and what time it was when you pressed play. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The cell door closes behind you with a weight that feels more final than any sentence. Not a slam, just a dull thud of thick wood settling into stone, as though the walls have absorbed this routine. You're not cuffed anymore, but there's nowhere to go. The room is square, bare, and cold, and yet strangely clean. A single chair, a cot with no blanket, no window. And then, a man steps forward with a bundle of black cloth in his gloved hands. He doesn't speak. He doesn't look you in the eye. He only lifts the cloth slowly, like a priest preparing for a quiet ritual. This is no simple blindfold. It's tailored, layered, and shaped for permanence. Once it's tied behind your head, the edges pinch softly at your jawline and pull tight around the bridge of your nose. You can breathe, but not fully. You can see, but only in shadows. The mask muffles your voice if you try to speak and makes your breath sound like it belongs to someone else. You reach up instinctively to touch it. That's when he speaks for the first time. Not a threat, not even an order, just a flat recitation of fact. You are not to remove it, ever. To do so would be considered treason, punishable by death. Not your death, others. The guards, the jailer, anyone who might have seen your face. So the mask is not truly for you. It's for them. And in a strange way, that makes it heavier. You try to ask why, or even who, but your voice doesn't seem to go far in this place. The cloth catches it, the walls absorb it, and the man is already gone. The room doesn't echo, though it should. Maybe that's on purpose. The floor is stone, the walls are thick, and everything feels padded by silence. A place built not just to contain sound, but to erase it. You wonder how far underground you are. You didn't count the steps on the way in. The journey here was done by carriage, mostly at night, through towns where the shutters were closed and the people asleep. Even now, you don't know what this place is called. And perhaps you're not meant to. The name would only be another loose thread someone could pull. Better to keep things simple. You're the man in the mask. That's enough. At first, you think someone will come back, that there's more to say, maybe some explanation, some reasoning. But no one does. You wait for a sound, a key, a footstep, even the clatter of a tray. Nothing. The silence has a texture to it, soft, smothering, almost sticky. You shift on the cot, and even the straw beneath the sheet tries to hold still. Eventually, a small flap in the door opens. A hand pushes through a metal dish, bread, maybe cheese, and a bit of wine in a chipped tin cup. You're not starving, but you're also not spoken to. The hand disappears, and the flap clicks shut. You never see a full face, and you quickly realize you never will. That night, or what you assume is night, you try to sleep. But the mask shifts when you lie down, and every breath against the cloth makes your skin damp and restless. You itch where the straps touch the back of your neck. The air feels too still. Even dreaming feels like a luxury you're no longer allowed. Every part of you aches, not from pain, but from uncertainty. You don't know how long you'll be here, or who knows you're here, or what they call you when they speak in hushed tones. Do they speak at all? You wake up, eventually. Or maybe you never slept. Time in this place flows sideways, not forward. There's no sun to mark it, no bell, no routine. Only meals at strange intervals, masks, shadows, and silence. You begin to forget what your own voice sounds like. And what's worse, you start to accept that this might be the point, not to punish you with pain or hunger, but to let you vanish, gently, slowly, thoroughly. Your fingers find the edges of the mask again. You know better than to try removing it. But sometimes, in the quiet moments, you imagine what your reflection would look like now. If the cloth were velvet, is it still clean? If it's iron, as some whisper later, how does it stay on your face without cutting? These questions don't help, but they keep you from slipping entirely. Some prisoners scratch tallies into stone. You make mental lists of people who might have ordered this, and why. It's not just the mask that confines you. It's the idea that it must stay on, because your face is dangerous. The notion that your appearance alone could unravel something so carefully hidden. It required iron locks, anonymous guards, and permanent silence. It's not madness, but it's close. And sometimes, in the dead middle of the longest hours, you wonder if someone out there is just waiting for you to break, to beg, to ask for the name they've already taken away. Still, you sit. You eat what you're given. You learn to keep your thoughts quiet, and your breathing shallow. You begin to recognize the steps of your jailer by the sound of his boots. He walks slowly, purposefully, never speaks. But something about his rhythm feels familiar, too familiar. Like someone who's not just guarding you, but guarding the story. The silence around you isn't random. It's designed, enforced, and it has rules you're only beginning to notice. Which is when you start to understand the deeper horror. It's not that you're forgotten. It's that you're remembered, but forbidden. Your existence has been curated, packaged, and placed under glass like a dangerous relic. And that brings a new kind of weight to your mask. One you can't lift with your hands. It's not just covering your face. It's covering a truth that even your captors aren't allowed to say aloud. And so you wait, because someone must know. Someone must have written the order, signed the document, told the jailer what to do. And if you're lucky or unlucky enough, you might just see his shadow pass outside your door. You might just hear the distant echo of Versailles in the footfall of your next transfer. Because this is only the beginning. And before long, you'll be moved again. To another cell, another fortress. Still masked. Still unnamed. Still under the careful eye of a man who follows wherever you go. You stop expecting to be called by a name. After enough months, or has it already been years, you realize that no one refers to you at all. Not even in whispers between guards or scribbled notes passed hand to hand. There are sounds, of course. Keys rattling, doors groaning, footsteps pacing outside your cell, but never a name. Not yours. Not anyone's. It's as though language itself has been stripped down around you. You're not addressed. You're handled, shifted, observed. If you ask a question, you're met with a slight tilt of the head or a blink. Sometimes a pause just long enough to confirm the silence is deliberate. Eventually, you stop speaking altogether, and in that space, something begins to rot inside you. Not your sanity, at least not yet, but your memory of being someone. Your birth name, whatever it was, feels like a distant vibration rather than a word. You try mouthing it sometimes in the dark, rolling syllables over your tongue, testing if they still sound like yours. But it's not just the mask that makes you forget. It's the stillness, the routine, the fact that no one speaks it aloud, so your name begins to erode, grain by grain, like a statue left in a salt wind. What remains is only the sense of having once been someone specific, someone with a family, a title perhaps, or even enemies. And now you're just a shape behind a mask. You suspect that even your jailer, Saint Mars, avoids naming you. He appears more regularly now, always alone, always composed. He's not cruel, but he's also not friendly. His attention is efficient. If your mask slips, he tightens it. If your garments wear thin, they're replaced. If you're sick, a physician arrives, not to ask questions, only to administer a treatment and retreat. When you try to speak, if ever, you can almost see the effort he puts into ignoring your voice. There's no record of your words, no acknowledgement that you've made a sound. It's as if you've been declared a ghost, and everyone around you has sworn not to notice the haunting. And yet, despite the vow of silence, you are treated with peculiar care. You're never beaten. Your food is good, not lavish, but warm, real. You're given paper and ink on occasion, though your letters vanish unanswered. Once, you tried slipping a message between the seams of your mattress. It disappeared before morning. Not a word came back. Just another mask, freshly laundered, laid across your pillow like a statement. We know. You begin to think of your cell not as a punishment, but as a museum exhibit that hasn't been announced yet. Preserved, maintained, watched, perhaps by more eyes than you know. The guards may not speak, but their posture shifts when you stand. Someone's always reporting something. Somewhere, someone is reading a ledger with your movements recorded in tidy lines. Prisoner rose at dawn. Ate most of meal. Attempted eye contact. Did not speak. Mask intact. And yet, the question keeps whispering back to you. Why? Why this? Why the mask? Why the silence? If they wanted you dead, they'd have done it long ago. If they feared what you might say, why not remove your tongue and be done with it? No, it's more complicated. You're being kept, preserved, a secret but a living one. You begin to wonder if your name, your real one, might still be spoken somewhere. In court, in confidence, perhaps in Versailles, behind golden doors and silk-draped chambers. Someone whispers it like a spell, a danger too sharp to speak aloud. One day, as you're being transferred to a different cell within the same fortress, you catch a sliver of accidental humanity. A young soldier helping to carry your trunk looks at you longer than he should. There's fear in his eyes, but also curiosity. He glances to your face, then quickly away, and says nothing. But that look stays with you. He knows something, or he thinks he does. Rumors have a way of traveling faster than official orders, especially in places filled with locked doors. You wonder what he's heard. That you're a madman? A traitor? A brother to someone important? You think about calling out. Not your name, just something. Anything. But your voice would carry. And worse, someone might answer. And then he would die. That's the rule you've learned. Not by decree, not on paper, but in consequence. Anyone who sees you too clearly, listens too closely, or speaks your name above a whisper disappears. So you say nothing. You let the mask do its work. The days begin to blend again. You mark time by absurd things. The number of spoonfuls in your stew, the rhythm of the guards' patrols, the groan of the hinges when the night door opens. But even those measures start to blur. Your world has been reduced to sensory fragments. The texture of wool against your wrists, the cool metal of the mask in the morning, the musty smell of damp stone, the faint iron tongue in your drinking water. The fewer words you use, the more vivid your senses become. But they're all contained, all muted, all faced inward. Still, a part of you refuses to let go. You dream names, fragments of them. Felipe, Henry, Etienne. Sometimes they wake you in the dark. You can't tell if they're yours or someone else's. But one thing you've come to believe with painful certainty. If your captors have gone this far to erase your name, then it must have mattered. You must have mattered. That knowledge, however faint, becomes your companion. Not hope, not exactly, but something like defiance. If they want you to disappear, then your very persistence is rebellion. Breathing behind the mask, standing when they expect you to cower, thinking when they offer silence. You may not remember your name, but you remember that you had one. And in this place, where nothing is said aloud, that alone feels like a victory. The silence continues, but it no longer feels empty. Now you sense the edges of its shape. It has weight, purpose. It's not just meant to contain you. It's meant to protect something bigger than you. A secret large enough that it must walk quietly, eat alone, sleep behind locked doors, and never be called anything at all. And that's why the next stage feels different. Because when you're moved again, this time in darkness, down a spiral stair and into a colder part of the fortress, the mask is replaced, not with velvet, not with silk, with something heavier, something colder, something that sounds like iron when it's set on the table, waiting to be fastened to your head. You no longer think of meals as events. They're not markers of time or even sources of comfort. They're simply interruptions, small breaks in the stillness, reminders that your body still functions, even when the world pretends you don't exist. The food arrives without a sound, passed through a slot, or left just inside the door when you're turned away. There are no greetings, no glances, no rhythm to it. Sometimes it's early. Sometimes it's late. Sometimes it doesn't come at all. And somehow, that inconsistency becomes the most reliable thing you know. Today, it's bread and something resembling stew, or not hot. The bread is dense and stale at the edges, the crust tougher than you'd like, but you chew it anyway. You chew because it's something to do. You chew because there's a rhythm to it. But even that gets strange after a while. You begin to wonder if the bread is meant to be dry, if the wine is slightly watered, if the stew changes from one week to the next, or if you're imagining all of it. There's no calendar, no way to compare. Each bite could be a repetition of the last, or a completely new meal disguised by sameness. You eat in silence. That much never changes. You don't know the names of the hands that prepare your meals. You don't know where the ingredients come from. You don't know if it's the same person every time, or if your tray passes through a chain of frightened intermediaries before reaching you. It might as well be prepared by ghosts. Or maybe you're the ghost, and the living are just doing what they cannot to notice your shadow in their hallway. Once you find a bay leaf in your bowl and stare at it for a full minute before eating. It's nothing. A garnish. An accident, maybe. But it reminds you of something. Kitchens, spices, voices. Of a life that smelled like food being made for more than one person. For company. For conversation. And just like that, the leaf becomes a relic. A sacred object, more powerful than the meal itself. You take your time. There's no one to hurry for. But you also know, if you let the food sit too long, it disappears without warning. The tray vanishes between blinks. No one knocks. No one asks. You never see the door open. Sometimes it feels like the fortress breathes you in and out like a lung, drawing in your scraps, your skin, your sighs, then exhaling them into oblivion. One day, your wine is stronger than usual. Not enough to intoxicate, but enough to make you pause. Did someone slip just a little? Or was it on purpose? You listen for footsteps, half hoping someone will come in, will say something, will laugh, and tell you it was a mistake. No one does. You drink the rest in silence, aware that even pleasure, even indulgence, feels suspicious here. Every kindness you're offered is wrapped in uncertainty. Every taste that feels too rich is followed by a question you don't get to ask. At times, the monotony becomes surreal. You begin to imagine elaborate feasts just to break the repetition. You picture saffron rice, roasted meats, fish glistening with citrus and salt. You remember long tables, silver goblets, the sound of a fork tapping against porcelain while someone laughs nearby. Whether those memories are real or stitched together from dreams, you don't know. But they make the silence taste worse. They make the real food feel hollow. You stop fantasizing. It hurts too much. Instead, you take note of details. How many spoonfuls in the bowl? Whether the bread leans left or right on the plate. Whether the water tastes of tin or stone. These become your rituals. Not prayers, exactly, but something like them. a way to keep your mind from sinking into the slow rot of this place. The mask dulls your sense of smell, so your other senses rise to fill the gap. You learn to listen to your chewing. You feel every texture more vividly. The rough edge of a crust becomes the most tactile part of your day, and yet you are never ill. Not once. Your meals, though plain, are nourishing. Your water is clean. Someone is ensuring your health, just enough to keep you here, just enough to maintain the silence. That realization crawls up your spine in the middle of one long night. They aren't feeding you out of pity. They're feeding you because you're meant to last. You begin to notice a pattern in the way the trays are retrieved. A knock that isn't quite a knock. A silence that seems thicker than usual just before the door creaks. You start placing small markers on the tray, crumbs in specific shapes, bent pieces of bread, tiny patterns drawn in spilled wine. Not to send a message, just to see if anyone notices. The next time, the crumbs are arranged differently, not erased, rearranged. And now you know, someone is watching more closely than you thought, but they still won't speak to you. They still don't call you by name. And maybe it's better that way, because you don't know what they'd say if they could. Maybe the silence is a form of mercy. Or maybe it's the last part of the punishment, being remembered without being acknowledged. Known, but not seen. Alive, but not quite a person anymore. Eventually, the meals start coming earlier. Not by much, just a few minutes. You can tell, though, because you've trained your body to recognize the waiting. It's a subtle shift, like a clock ticking somewhere just outside the wall. A schedule you were never meant to know, adjusting ever so slightly. And then the meals stop altogether for a day. You wait, stomach aching, not with hunger, but with confusion. Was it a test? A mistake? You say nothing. You knock on the door once, twice. No response. And then, that night, it arrives. A larger tray, more wine, softer bread, the stew fragrant with herbs you haven't tasted in years. A feast, quiet and modest by any standard, but in here, it feels like a banquet. Something is changing. You don't know what it is, but you feel it in your bones. And when the tray is taken again, you notice a second set of footsteps in the hall. Lighter, hesitant. You press your ear to the door and hear a voice whisper something. Too quiet to make out. It isn't meant for you, but it confirms what you've suspected. Your isolation isn't total. There are cracks in the silence. And soon, you'll be moved again. The food was never just nourishment. It was communication, delivered without words. And now, the message has shifted. You're no longer just being fed. You're being prepared. It starts with a cough in the hallway. A human sound, ordinary, even forgettable. But in a place designed for silence, it cracks like thunder. You sit up, ears straining, heart thudding not from fear, but from anticipation. That cough doesn't belong to your usual guards. It's younger, nervous. You can almost picture the man behind it. Eyes darting down stone corridors, hand to his mouth too late to stop the slip. And with that one cough, the fortress changes. Not in bricks or locks, but in the feeling that you're not alone. Not truly, not anymore. There are others here. You've known it for some time. The rustle of clothes down the stairwell, the soft squeak of boots on the lower steps, the way voices leak through walls, no matter how thick. You don't hear conversations, not full ones, just fragments, a muttered curse, a laugh that's quickly stifled, once even a sob. But lately, there's something else, a tension in the air, as if people are speaking about something they aren't supposed to, something forbidden. You begin to notice patterns. Guards that once avoided eye contact now glance your way a second too long. A change in their posture, a stiffness in their routines. Someone drops a spoon outside your cell. Another whispers, "Pardon," as they pass your tray, an accident, or so it seems. But you know better. The silence around you is carefully curated. Any noise is a breach. And when breaches begin to appear, it means the scenes are weakening. It's not long before you overhear a name. Not yours, but a name whispered with urgency just beyond your wall. The masked one, someone says, followed by hurried steps and a door closing too quickly. You press your ear to the cold stone, breath shallow, but the conversation has already dissolved. Still, the words echo in your mind. They know. Not everything, perhaps, but enough to give you a title. A story. A danger wrapped in cloth and iron. Soon after, you begin hearing variations. Some call you the monk, others the brother. And once, through the floorboards, someone hisses "Le jumeau," the twin. It's said like a curse. You freeze at the word, hands trembling not from fear, but recognition. There's a story in that name, a shape behind it that feels too specific to be coincidence. You begin to wonder how many versions of your identity exist in this place. How many myths are being crafted just outside your cell, each one pulling at the truth like a thread in a tapestry. It seems everyone has a theory. The cook's boy thinks you're a sorcerer. A guard's wife believes you once tried to kill the king. A stableman claims you cursed a chapel with your gaze. The stories ripple outward, embroidered by distance, fear, and the irresistible pull of forbidden knowledge. You can't speak to them. You can't respond, but you listen. And through their speculation, you catch glimpses of yourself, or at least the version of you they've built. You realize that the mask isn't just a barrier. It's a mirror. Everyone who sees it reflects something different onto it: guilt, suspicion, curiosity, even hope. You've become more than a prisoner. You're a symbol now, of secrets too dangerous to name, of sins that power can't cleanse with confession, of the things France keeps beneath its polished floors. Sometimes the rumors turn cruel. You hear snatches of mocking songs, short rhymes about your face being too ugly to show, your mouth full of poison, your eyes red from madness. You learn to ignore them. They sting, yes, but not because they're cruel, because they're afraid. People only mock what they can't understand. And no one here truly understands why a man would be hidden, erased, and sealed behind a mask for decades. The silence that once isolated you now becomes your weapon. Every step you take in the hallway, every glance you give behind those metal slits in your mask, carries weight. People flinch. They whisper faster. Some make the sign of the cross. Others bow, confused as to whether they're in the presence of royalty or ruin. You don't correct them. You can't. And even if you could, what would you say? That you're just a man who once had a name? That you're being punished for something no one will admit happened? That even you have begun to forget whether you're a danger or a victim? You wonder who started the first rumor. Was it a servant too curious for his own good? A scribe who read too far into a prisoner manifest? Or someone closer to power, perhaps, slipping a whisper into the public just to see how far it would spread? Outside, beyond the walls, the stories ripple even further. You don't hear them yourself, but you sense it in the changing tone of the guards. The ones who once treated you with distant professionalism now carry unease in their shoulders. They rush their duties. Avoid your eyes. One even crosses himself when he passes your cell, as if you're a relic from an older, more dangerous century. And in rare moments, when a shift in the fortress leaves a door cracked or a conversation unfinished, you hear your legend growing. Not your truth, your legend. They say you're the Sun King's brother, locked away to preserve the crown. They say you were once a lover of a queen, exiled to protect her honor. They say you know something about a war, a betrayal, a birth that should never have happened. You can't laugh, not really. The mask makes that difficult, but the idea of it almost makes you smile. Because in a way, the rumors are all correct. You are dangerous, but not in the way they think. And the more they whisper, the more those whispers begin to climb. From the barracks to the kitchens, from the guard posts to the court, someone is listening. Someone who isn't content with silence anymore. Which is why, one morning, the guards come with new orders. No explanation. Just the dull sound of boots on stone, the scraping of keys, and the sharp command to stand. You know what's happening before they say it. You're being moved. Again, they don't tell you where you're going. Of course they don't. By now, you've stopped expecting explanations. All you're given is a thicker cloak than usual, gloves that don't quite fit, and a longer mask. This one with padding inside, designed to muffle your voice more completely and narrow your field of vision to a slit. They don't chain you. They don't strike you, but they move quickly, decisively, and in silence. You know better than to ask questions. The men who come for you are different this time, not your usual guards. These are faceless in their own way, cloaked in hoods and leather, speaking to each other in a coded shorthand you don't recognize. The hallway outside your cell is darker than usual. The torches have been dimmed or removed. It's the kind of darkness that feels heavy, like damp cloth pressing against your skin. You walk between the guards, not bound, but clearly not free. They move at a brisk pace through corridors you've never seen, past doors you didn't know existed. You try to take mental notes, count the turns, mark the sound of the floor underfoot, but the path feels circular, intentionally confusing. Someone has rehearsed this route to avoid detection. Outside, the air hits you like a forgotten memory. Crisp, cool, layered with salt and moss, and faint wood smoke. It's been years since you last smelled the sky. Even masked, it reaches you. And for a moment, you feel disoriented. Not because of the scent, but because you recognize it. This is not a new place. This is the coast. The carriage is waiting with its door already open. It's not gaudy or royal, just practical, well-maintained but anonymous, with thick curtains and extra latches. You're ushered in quickly, and then the door shuts tight behind you. No lantern inside, just darkness. The guards don't sit with you. You travel alone, boxed in by velvet and silence. The road begins, uneven and slow at first. The carriage creaks with effort, the horses working hard against muddy terrain. You try to listen, not to the wheels or the hooves, but to what's missing, towns, voices, the sound of church bells. You hear none of them. This is not the road to Paris. It's not even the road to any city you've known. This path winds away from the world, toward places maps have chosen to forget. Hours pass, maybe longer. You drift in and out of something like sleep, though it's too restless to offer any peace. The mask presses harder against your cheek when you slump, and the edge of it digs into the base of your skull when the road lurches. When the carriage finally stops, it's abrupt, no fanfare. Just a sudden halt, and the creak of a door you can't see. They pull you out gently, but firmly, guiding you down a narrow slope. You can feel gravel underfoot, the sting of sea air sharper now, cutting through the cloth of your mask. You're near water. You hear it, not crashing waves, but the rhythmic slap of tide against stone. Then the unmistakable sound of a boat rocking against a dock. You're ferried next, not rowed, not sailed, but pushed forward by a strong current and men who don't speak. You sit in the center of the vessel, a hood now layered over your mask, muffling not only your sight, but your hearing. The air is damp and unforgiving. Your cloak clings to you. Your gloves are slick with dew. And beneath the surface of everything, there's a humming. Not mechanical, not natural. Just the kind of low, relentless hum that comes when too many people are trying to stay quiet for too long. Eventually, you feel the boat nudge against stone. Hands lift you, carefully, as always. Never rough. Almost reverently. You step onto solid ground, and though your vision is still blocked, you sense walls around you, closed, tall, maybe even cliffs. This isn't a mainland fortress. It's something older. something tucked away. When the hood is removed, you blink against the candlelight. You're inside again, in another corridor. Narrower, older. The air smells of salt and iron. The stone here is rougher, less polished. You recognize none of it. But you do recognize the man standing in front of you. St. Mars. He hasn't aged the way you expected. He's not older. He's harder. His face is thinner. His eyes colder. Still loyal, still efficient. Still the same man who once adjusted your velvet mask with surprising gentleness in a cell far away. You'd thought him a warden, but he's something else now. A shadow tethered to your existence. He says nothing, merely nods once, then turns and leads the way down a corridor that feels like a tunnel. You follow because you have no choice, but also because some small part of you wants to see how deep this rabbit hole goes. The walls sweat. The candles flicker. The air feels borrowed from a century long gone. At last, you reach your new cell. Smaller than the last, colder. A window, but sealed with iron bars so thick they may as well be walls. A cot, a stool, a desk you won't use. And in the far corner, a chamber pot that confirms you'll be here for a while. St. Mars gestures toward the cot. You sit. He produces a new mask. Not cloth this time, not even padded. This one is metal. Not shining or decorative, just heavy, practical, brutally simple. He sets it on the desk between you like an offering and places a key beside it. He doesn't hand it to you, doesn't explain what it unlocks. He leaves without a word. The door closes, the lock turns. You stare at the iron mask for a long time. Its shape isn't meant for comfort. Its eye holes are narrow. The mouth barely opens. It's not for hiding. It's for silencing. And the presence of the key beside it, mocking in its stillness, tells you what this is. A test, a warning, or both. You don't put it on. Not yet. You lie down on the cot, still in your old mask, and close your eyes. The sea wind sighs against the stone outside. And somewhere, just beyond reach, you hear the muffled voices of two men arguing in low tones. You can't make out the words, but you catch one phrase before it fades. If anyone speaks to him, they die. You've heard it before, but tonight it feels different. Not like a threat, more like a prophecy. And as you lie there, iron mask gleaming in the dark, you realize you're not just a prisoner anymore. You're a secret that refuses to be buried. There are no clocks in your cell. No bells mark the passage of time. No voices signal the shift from one hour to the next. What remains is an endless stretch of sameness, where the boundaries between day and night blur into an unbroken haze. At first, you try to measure time through the sound of footsteps in the corridor or the delivery of your meals, each one a crude approximation of a schedule. But even those small events begin to drift. The meals come earlier, then later. Sometimes not at all. The guards walk slower, then faster. The lanterns are dimmed, then removed. Slowly, methodically, time becomes unmoored. Without a framework to hold it, time begins to behave strangely. You sleep too long, then barely sleep at all. Your dreams come at odd hours, and your memories are no longer anchored to any particular sequence. You remember a birthday cake, though you're not sure if it was yours, or the scent of ink on parchment, or a garden full of figs and bees. These moments rise and fall like bubbles in deep water, untethered from meaning. You try to focus, to keep some internal ledger of days past, but even your thoughts become unreliable companions. They loop, wander, and fade. The silence around you doesn't just muffle the world, it distorts it. There are no mirrors in your cell, and you haven't seen your reflection in years. You imagine your appearance changing, slowly and invisibly, like a building decaying behind sealed doors. You feel your beard grow, an itch beneath the mask, trimmed only when someone deems it necessary. often while you sleep or drift in a stupor of silence. The iron mask, once so foreign, has become your second skin. The pressure of it is constant against your brow, your cheekbones, the curve of your jaw. Sometimes it feels fused to your bones. You no longer know what you look like beneath it. You no longer remember what it felt like to speak freely or to be recognized on sight. Outside the cell, the world continues. You know this because of the changes you can't help but notice. The chill of winter air creeping through the walls, the shift in the taste of your drinking water, the rare flash of light from a storm beyond the tiny, barred window. Sometimes the candles used by the guards are made of tallow, sometimes of beeswax. At first, you think this observation is trivial, but after a time, you realize these are your only clues. The quality of the wax tells you something about resources. The smell of their smoke gives away the season. The scraps left behind on your tray, apples, potatoes, fish, speak of harvests and trade. The guards change too. Younger faces arrive. Some are nervous around you. Others try not to look at all. St. Mars visits less frequently now. When he does appear, he doesn't speak, but his face has changed. His eyes are older, more sunken. His movements are slower, as though he's begun to bear the weight of the years you've both endured. There is something unspoken between you, not affection, not camaraderie, but a strange shared gravity. You have become two stones sunk in the same river, immobile, forgotten by the world above, but bound by the same current. Whatever reasons he once had for guarding you so loyally, he no longer shows them. And yet he stays, always near, always watching. You wonder sometimes if anyone still remembers the reason you were imprisoned. If your name, your story, your supposed crime has slipped from the mouths of men in court and become only a whisper passed between servants. You imagine your past like a sealed scroll in a locked cabinet, dust-covered and untouched. It no longer matters whether you are guilty or innocent. What matters is that you exist, that you are still here. A living contradiction, a question no one is allowed to ask. And then, just as you begin to believe this will be your eternity, something changes. One morning, though the light barely shifts in your cell, a man arrives. He is not a guard, nor a warden. His clothing is too fine, his posture too deliberate. He carries a leather case and wears the look of someone who has come not to visit, but to assess. He does not speak at first. He merely watches you for a long, quiet moment, as though studying a rare object behind glass. Then he leans forward and offers a phrase in a voice too measured to be casual. The king has not forgotten. He says nothing more. He leaves as silently as he arrived, but his words settle over you like dust, fine and inescapable. You turn them over in your mind long after he's gone, not because they comfort you, but because they confirm a deeper truth. Your story is not over. Your imprisonment has not been forgotten. It has been preserved. And somewhere, far from these walls, a man in a palace is still watching. So now, at last, we turn our eyes to him, to Louis XIV, the radiant monarch who cast the longest shadows in France, to the path that brought you here, to the man who followed you across prisons and decades, and to the choices made behind silk curtains and locked doors. The mask may have covered your face, but the order that sealed it began in gold and velvet. The walls of Pinerolo rise like teeth from the edge of the Alps, a fortress not made to impress, but to disappear into stone. As your carriage climbs the final switch back, the horses struggle against the gradient, and the wind bites at the creases of your cloak. This isn't Versailles. There's no music here, no fountains, no scent of jasmine on the breeze. Only rock, mist, and the smell of lichen and wood smoke. You hear the gate open before you see it, the groan of wood on rusted iron, and then the world narrows to a courtyard of flagstones and shadows. St. Mars is already waiting for you. He doesn't say your name. In fact, he doesn't address you at all. But there's something in the way he watches you descend from the carriage. Measured, unreadable, but not indifferent. He's not a man who improvises. Everything about him is crisp, clean, rehearsed. He offers a nod, gestures once, and turns his back, expecting you to follow. The guards are present, but distant. No spears pointed. No barking orders. Just a quiet choreography. Steps taken, doors opened, torches passed hand to hand like sacred relics. And so you enter Pinerolo, not as a prisoner marched in chains, but as a guest whose arrival was foretold. Your new cell is small but clean. The stone is cold and smells faintly of moss and iron, but the floor has been swept. There's a cot, a chair, and a small desk. The window, if it can be called that, is a slit carved through stone that offers no view, only a teasing brush of air and shifting light. The door closes behind you with more care than force, and for a long time, there is nothing else. Just the sound of your own breath beneath the mask. Time settles here differently than it did in your previous prison. The silence is deeper, but the air feels less oppressive. You are not entirely alone. Pinerolo houses other prisoners, though you rarely see them. You hear them, though. A cough down the hall, the scrape of boots, the hollow murmur of someone muttering to himself in a cell nearby. Occasionally, the voice rises, arguing with someone invisible, then quiet again. You don't know his name. You won't be told. But you begin to piece together his habits. When he sleeps, when he paces, when he weeps softly, thinking no one can hear. St. Mars visits regularly, but never speaks. He brings documents, oversees the food delivery, makes notes in a slim ledger bound in dark leather. He examines your cell without touching anything. His expression never changes, but his eyes do. You sense that he's watching not just for your behavior, but for cracks. Cracks in you, signs of slipping, of questions. You wonder if he expects you to speak, or if he hopes you never will. Either way, the ritual becomes familiar. He enters, glances around, meets your masked gaze for a beat too long, then leaves. Your meals are better than expected. Simple, but consistent. A bowl of lentils with rosemary, bread that's only a day old, even a sliver of cheese now and then. It feels less like prison fare and more like the diet of someone meant to stay alive for a long time. Someone whose health, however inconvenient, is necessary. The pattern of your days is plain but not cruel. You walk the narrow stretch of your cell. You sit, you listen, you wait, and all the while, the mask remains. But Pinerolo doesn't forget you. The guards talk, though not to your face. You catch their glances, hear their rumors. They never say your name, but you begin to understand how the story spreads. A servant overhears something. A guard reads too far into a document. A priest notices an omission in the registry. And suddenly, you're no longer just a prisoner. You're a mystery, a threat, a warning whispered to new recruits. Don't ask about the masked one. Eventually, word travels up the mountain and back down again. St. Mars begins ordering new protocols. Guards are rotated. Access is limited. Even the priest assigned to your cell is replaced by a younger man who seems terrified of you. His hands tremble as he blesses the bread. You try to look at him just to acknowledge him, but he averts his gaze, says his prayers faster, and retreats as soon as the ritual ends. You begin to suspect that you are being preserved not just physically, but ceremonially. You are the center of an elaborate performance. Every silence, every sidelong glance, every withheld name is part of a script rehearsed behind locked doors. You are not meant to understand the lines. You are simply meant to remain visible, but unknowable. Weeks become months. Or at least, that's your best guess. The weather changes, though the cell offers little evidence beyond colder nights and the dampness that settles into your bones. The mountain fog creeps through the cracks at dawn, curling along the floor like smoke. You sometimes dream you're back in a city, any city, walking freely. You don't even need to be seen. Just to walk unnoticed would be enough. But when you wake, the mask is still there. So is the stone. One night, you hear a commotion. Not a fight, exactly, but something heated. Raised voices. Furniture dragged across the floor. You press your ear to the wall. A prisoner is being restrained. Moved, perhaps. You hear Saint Mars' voice, calm but insistent, giving an order. Then silence. Not a single noise for hours afterward. The next day, the corridor feels emptier, and the guards walk as if something has shifted. You are left wondering if the man down the hall, who once mumbled and wept and argued with ghosts, has been moved or buried. Saint Mars does not acknowledge it. He visits you that afternoon, checks the ledger, inspects the hinges on your door, and leaves. The silence between you is now weighted differently. He knows that you've heard something, and you know that he won't speak of it. The pact remains intact, but the trust between jailer and prisoner, if it ever existed, has grown thinner. And then, without warning, your meals change. Slightly. Better bread, warmer stew, a small cloth napkin, folded once, placed neatly on the tray. It's a shift so small most would miss it. But you don't. You've learned to measure time in crumbs and cutlery. This is not hospitality. It's a signal. Someone is preparing for something. You don't know what. Not yet. But soon, you'll be moved again. The walls of Pinerolo will no longer be enough. Because the order from Versailles has changed, and your journey is far from over. It leads to the coast now, to an island fortress surrounded by salt and wind. And when you arrive, the secrecy will deepen, the silence will harden, and the mask will become more than just an object. It will become your identity. Saint Mars follows you like a shadow that never speaks. From Pinerolo to the coast, from fortress to fortress, through changing seasons and the decay of years, he remains your one constant. Not a companion, not a protector, just a presence, steady and tireless. You don't know why he's attached to your case so completely. Others come and go, but Saint Mars persists. Always silent, always watching. You never hear his opinions. You're not even sure he has any. But what becomes clear over time is that his loyalty isn't to you. It's to the role, to the unspoken rule that whatever you are, whoever you are, must never be revealed. The journey from Pinerolo to Sainte Marguerite is long and carried out with the same level of secrecy you've come to expect. You're moved at night again, your mask adjusted and reinforced. This time the iron feels colder. Your wrists are gloved, your cloak thick, your hat broad enough to shadow your face completely. When the guards speak, it's only in murmurs. One of them crosses himself when the boat pushes off from the dock. Not for you exactly, but because of what you represent. The island fortress that receives you isn't large. Just stone, wind, gulls, and the smell of salt. The walls rise blunt and undecorated, a place built more for hiding and for resisting. There are no villagers nearby, no crowds, no markets. Just the sea, and a silence that deepens with each footstep that echoes through the halls. But even before you step off the boat, you know who's waiting inside. Saint Mars, again, dressed in the same impeccable black, the same stiff collar, the same blank expression. He offers no greeting, no hand. He simply gestures toward the corridor and begins walking. He has no need to speak, not anymore. You've learned to read his intent in the way he places his feet, in the tilt of his head, in the way his hand rests on the hilt of the key at his belt. His routine is precise, almost priestly. He checks the bolts on your door, the hinges on the window shutters, the stitching on the mask straps. Everything must be exactly right, not for comfort, for control. He keeps the rules of your captivity as though they're sacred instructions handed down from a king who never needs to explain himself. At first, you think his commitment is driven by fear. then by duty. But over time, it begins to resemble something stranger, a kind of faith, not in you, perhaps, but in the necessity of your silence, in the ritual of your confinement. He doesn't just guard you, he tends to you. If your boots are worn, he replaces them. If your health falters, he summons a physician, but never with compassion, more like a caretaker preserving a relic. Your continued survival is part of the structure. It's not about you. It's about maintaining the shape of the mystery. You begin to notice the boundaries of his silence. When others ask about you in his presence, guards, doctors, priests, he redirects, changes the subject, or simply stares until they fall quiet. No one dares question him directly. He has the king's trust, and perhaps more importantly, the king's authority. And whatever St. Mars believes about your identity, he has decided that knowing is not as important as obeying. Whether you're a criminal, a royal, or something else entirely, it doesn't matter to him. The rules are what matter. But still, there are moments when his silence flickers. Once, as he tightens the straps on your mask, you hear him mutter a word under his breath, too low to catch, but shaped like a name. Yours? His? You look up sharply, but he only finishes his task, straightens your collar, and leaves. Another time, during a storm, he remains outside your cell longer than usual. You hear him pacing, then strangely humming, barely audible, but there. A tune so old you can't place it. The sound vanishes the moment the wind shifts, and the next day, he behaves as if it never happened. The guards on St. Marguerite are different from those at Pinerolo. Less disciplined, more curious. You see it in their faces when they pass your cell, the way they glance at the door a second too long. You hear snippets of conversation, quickly stifled when St. Mars rounds the corner. It's clear that they're guessing, trying to piece together why a man in a mask has been housed like a noble, fed well, and never allowed to speak. The rumors swirl more openly here. One says you're the son of an English queen, another says you're a sorcerer imprisoned for summoning spirits. One especially nervous cook swears he saw your eyes glow in the dark. St. Mars never addresses these rumors, but his routines grow sharper in response. He doubles the watch. He inspects your food personally. When one guard makes the mistake of asking him directly, who is he, truly? That man is reassigned within the week. You hear the clatter of his trunk being carried out at dawn. No goodbyes, no explanations. The message is clear. And yet, there are times when you sense St. Mars doubting something, not the rules, not the need for secrecy, but the source of it all. When he reads from the small leather-bound folio he keeps tucked beneath his arm, his brow creases, not from confusion, but from thought. You catch him once rereading a page twice, then glancing up at you as if seeing you differently, not as a prisoner, but as a problem that no longer has a clear answer. Still, he says nothing, and neither do you. The arrangement holds, the mask stays on, the doors stay locked. The guards fall silent in his presence, and the sea hums against the stone. But eventually, St. Mars receives new orders. Sealed, official, hand-delivered by a royal courier. You hear the exchange from your cell. Paper rustling, boots tapping, a sharp inhalation that is quickly stifled. That afternoon, your belongings are packed without comment. The mask is checked, the cloak is brushed, the boat is readied. St. Mars doesn't need to say it. You're being moved again. And this time, the destination is different. Not a remote fortress or distant island, but the capital itself. The heart of power. You're going to the Bastille. St. Marguerite sits like a stone secret, just off the southern coast of France, surrounded by the hush of waves and the endless, indifferent shimmer of the sea. It isn't a sprawling fortress. There are no vast courtyards or grand halls, just narrow corridors, damp walls, and wind that smells of salt and decay. From the moment you're let off the boat, You can feel that this place was chosen not for its strength, but for its silence. Isolation here isn't just a strategy, it's the entire point. Your cell is on an upper level, but there's no view. The slit of a window allows only light and air, never a glimpse of the sea you can hear constantly in the distance. It hisses like a whisper through the shutters, never rising, never still. You aren't told how long you'll stay. Of course you aren't. The guards know better than to speak of your presence. But you see it in their faces, confusion, unease, the way their eyes skim over you without quite meeting your own. They've been warned. And some of them are starting to wonder why. At first, the silence feels absolute. You hear nothing but footsteps, the rustle of your cloak, the scrape of a chair. But then, gradually, other sounds return. A voice down the corridor, a metal bucket dropped and quickly retrieved. A door closing too hard. The fortress lives. And more importantly, it listens. The men who work here carry your story like smoldering coals. They don't dare say it aloud, but it's burning in their hands all the same. The whispers begin among the younger guards, those not yet broken in by St. Mars's routines. They're too curious, too clumsy with their silence. You overhear fragments as they pass outside your cell. Questions disguised as jokes, jokes laced with fear. He's a prince, one mutters. No, his face was burned in a duel, another says. They say he killed a bishop. Someone else whispers in a tone that doesn't sound like he believes it. And then a new one. He's the king's brother. That rumor doesn't pass like the others. It sticks. You hear it again from different voices, like a tune passed between floors. There's always a hush afterward, a pause, the sort of silence people create when they know they've crossed into dangerous territory. You don't react outwardly, but inwardly, you hold the phrase in your mind and turn it over like a coin. The king's brother. The thought doesn't comfort you, but it anchors you. Because whoever you truly are, someone out there believes your identity is more dangerous than your actions. And if the mask is meant to hide that face, then the fear it inspires is doing exactly what it was designed to. Even the most careful men aren't immune to the pull of a mystery. The guards begin avoiding each other's eyes. They rush their steps past your door. A priest delivers communion, but forgets to bring the wine. A cook sends your tray with an extra slice of bread, and the next day, he's replaced. You're not spoken to, but you're being watched more closely than ever. And not just by St. Mars. You hear arguments in distant rooms, debates over duties, over access, over who's to be blamed if something happens. Something they don't name. The whispers aren't always about you. Sometimes they are about St. Mars, the man who never changes. The man who follows you across years and fortresses. They call him the Warden of Ghosts, or the King's Shepherd, and they wonder what he's hiding. You realize that St. Mars's silence has bred suspicion in more than one direction. He may be their commander, but he is also a mystery. And mystery, as you've learned, is contagious. One night, a candle is left burning just outside your door. A mistake, perhaps, or an invitation. You stare at it through the bars for hours, watching the wax melt, listening to the quiet pop of the wick. No one comes to retrieve it. When morning arrives, the candle is gone. The tray arrives late. The guards seem agitated. Something happened, and they won't say what. Then, a week later, you hear the scrape of a chair not far from your cell. A guard has stopped to rest. He thinks you're asleep. His voice is low, almost inaudible. He writes letters, he says, but they never go out. They're burned. One was signed. A second voice interrupts him with a hiss. Don't say it. Not here. That's the closest you come to hearing your own name. But it's enough. Enough to confirm that they've seen the pages you've written. Enough to confirm they've read them. And most of all, enough to confirm that whatever you wrote down once, someone made sure it was destroyed. You begin to wonder how many people outside these walls know you exist. Not just the king, not just St. Mars, but people in the court, advisors, ministers. Do they speak of you in coded language? Do they refer to you as the asset, the burden? Or are you reduced to a number in a ledger, a name scribbled and crossed out in the margins of royal correspondence? Once, your food arrives with a message folded beneath the napkin. Not a letter, just a single line. They know. You stare at it for a long time, then burn it in the candle you're no longer supposed to have. You say nothing to St. Mars. When he visits, you watch him carefully for any sign that he knows about the note. But he gives nothing away. Your cell begins to feel tighter. The sea sounds louder. The rumors are no longer confined to the lower levels. You can sense them seeping upward, toward people with sharper uniforms and more polished boots. The command structure here has shifted. You see new faces. You hear orders being given in clipped, urgent tones. One morning, a visiting official passes by your cell. He stops, looks in, doesn't speak, but his eyes linger on the mask with something that almost looks like recognition. Then he walks away. A week later, St. Mars appears with new papers. His face is unreadable, but he walks faster than usual. When he speaks to his staff, rare as that is, his tone is sharper. The fortress begins to hum with preparation. You're being moved again. But this time, there's no confusion in their urgency. The rumors have grown too large, the walls too thin. Saint Marguerite has failed to contain you. Not your body, but your story. And that is what matters most. The destination is Paris. And waiting at the end of the road is the Bastille. You arrive in Paris under heavy rain and heavier silence. The carriage rocks unevenly as it crosses the cobbled streets. Each jolt a dull reminder that this is no royal visit. There are no trumpets, no crowds. Just cloaks, boots, and the cold stink of horses. Your mask, tightened before departure, pinches harder than usual. It's been reinforced, polished, and padded, not for your comfort, but for containment. The eye slits are narrower. The weight pulls at your neck. And even though you can't see much through it, you can tell when the world shifts around you. You know the Bastille by feel alone. The sounds change first. Less sea, more stone. No gulls, but distant wheels, sharp voices echoing off alleyways, the scrape of cartwheels in the street. And then the drawbridge creaks open. The Bastille doesn't welcome. It absorbs. The walls rise steep and gray, pressing inward as if they were never meant to be seen from inside. This isn't a prison built to punish petty criminals. This is a vault for secrets. The kind of place that swallows names and histories whole. The guards who escort you are fewer now, but better dressed. More deliberate. They don't fumble, don't whisper. They move you with the precision of a military escort, as if you're not just dangerous, but priceless. A thing to be delivered intact. St. Mars is waiting inside. Of course he is. His collar is stiff as ever, his boots polished, his face unreadable. He doesn't greet you. He merely watches as the cell door opens. The final cell. This one is different. It's larger than the others. High ceilings, dry walls, a real bed instead of a cot. There's a desk, 2 chairs, a cabinet, even a thick rug stretched across the floor. At first glance, it resembles a modest chamber rather than a dungeon. It smells of beeswax and old paper, not mildew. You hear no rats. The torchlight is clean and steady. It's not comfort. It's containment. This cell is designed not just to hold you, but to hold you well. Whoever ordered it knew you'd be here for a long time. You sit. The mask stays on. St. Mars watches you for a moment longer, then steps forward and places a book on the desk. No title, just a ledger. He turns and leaves without explanation. The door closes, the lock clicks, and you're alone again, but differently this time. Not buried in stone or tucked into a mountain. You're in the heart of the kingdom now, a secret housed at its center. The Bastille is alive in a way that the other prisons were not. You hear it breathing through the cracks, guards on rotation, footsteps at all hours, voices echoing up staircases. Some speak too loudly, others speak too little. You hear names, real ones, not whispered guesses. Nobles, riders, soldiers. They come and go. You don't. But through the walls, you begin to gather a rhythm. Who gets extra bread? Who bribes for ink? Who cries at night? You're invisible, yes, but not deaf. Not lost. A mask hides your face, not your ears. You start to recognize patterns. The guards who joke too much. The ones who speak Latin when they think no one else understands. You pick up details, snatches of gossip, traces of scandal. Some prisoners send messages in code, smuggled through meals or letters concealed under plates. One bribes a guard to smuggle in chocolate. Another tries to hang himself with bedsheets and fails. You hear the thud when he hits the floor. The guards remove him the next morning, saying nothing. Compared to them, your treatment is refined. Meals are brought by hand. You're given wine, occasionally fruit. You're allowed to write, though your pages are taken and never returned. You test the boundaries once, scribbling a name, a date, a question. The next day, your inkwell is replaced with one that dries more quickly, your quill trimmed shorter. A warning without words. And still, St. Mars returns. Not daily, not predictably, but enough to remind you that your story isn't over. He reads the ledger, sometimes writes in it. You can't see what he records. But once, when he stands near the firelight, you glimpse your own handwriting among the pages. It's been copied, studied. You wonder who reads them. You wonder if the king himself has traced your sentences with a gloved hand. The Bastille guards know not to ask about you. That much is clear. But still, their curiosity leaks through the cracks. You feel it in the way they glance sideways when delivering your meals, or in how their conversations falter when passing your door. A few call you l'homme au masque de fer, the man in the iron mask. The phrase is said with a kind of reverence, as though naming you might invite misfortune. You listen without reacting. The name isn't correct, not fully, but it's close enough. It's better than being no one. Sometimes, the captain of the guard brings visitors on inspection tours. Wealthy men, foreign dignitaries. One afternoon, you hear a hushed conversation just outside your cell. A guest asks a question. The captain lowers his voice and says, "That room is off limits." There's a pause. Then a laugh, nervous and thin. The sound of footsteps retreating. You begin to feel more like an object than a prisoner. An artifact that must be preserved and never explained. Your presence here is not about justice or reform. It's about silence. You are a wall inside a wall. A truth buried in velvet and steel. And still, you watch. There's a boy who sweeps the hall sometimes. Thin, quiet, probably too young for this kind of work. He moves quickly, eyes always down. But once, as he passes your door, he stops. Only for a second. He looks up, meets your eyes through the slit in the mask. He doesn't flinch. He nods once, solemnly, then continues sweeping. You never see him again. The ledger on your desk grows thicker. You write in it because it's the only way you can still feel like you exist. The act of choosing words, of recording thoughts, it keeps you tethered. You write about the room, the guards, the taste of the wine. You write about the sound of the rain and the feel of the rug beneath your feet. You do not write your name. You do not write your history, but you write. And that, for now, is enough. Eventually, the pages stop vanishing. They begin returning. You find your entries neatly copied, bound into small leather books, placed quietly beside your pillow. You don't know who delivers them. You only know someone wants you to remember what you've written. Or perhaps they want a record of how long you've lasted. Your hands shake more now. You sleep less. But your mind stays sharp. And somewhere, just beyond these walls, the monarchy changes. Ministers die. Alliances shift. The Sun King ages. But you remain. Always masked, always contained. The Bastille will hold you until the very end. Not because you are dangerous, but because the truth about you is. And within that final cell, you begin to wonder. If the king dies before you, will anyone else know what to do with you? The ink stains on your fingers are the only proof that you still have a voice. The act of writing, silent though it is, has become your final expression, a rebellion done in quill and parchment. You write every day now, not because anyone commands you to, but because it's the last thing no one has taken away. The entries begin as records of what you observe. The texture of the bread, the draft from the north wall, the change in the guard shifts. Then they grow. You begin slipping fragments of thought between the lines, reflections, questions, even dreams. Not names, never dates, but suggestions. Shadows of who you once were, captured like pressed flowers in a journal. The ledger they gave you is no longer your only medium. One morning, Saint Mars, or someone under his direction, places a fresh stack of parchment on your desk. It's thicker, finer than before. A second inkwell appears a week later, this one sealed with wax. The wax bears no mark, no crest. But the message is clear. Someone is reading your words, and someone wants more. You test the boundaries. In a letter that begins with an observation about the weather, you embed a cipher, simple at first, then more elaborate. A repeated phrase with missing letters, an acrostic buried in the margin. You're not even sure why you do it. Perhaps it's boredom. Perhaps it's hope. Or perhaps it's the last twitch of agency you have left. The letter is taken, like all the others. But this time, 3 days later, the candle beside your bed is trimmed, the wick freshly cut. It's subtle, nearly meaningless, but it's different. And in this place, difference is a message. You begin to wonder who receives these pages. Is it a clerk buried in Versailles, recording your mental state, like a physician might track the pulse of a fevered patient? Is it an advisor, reading between the lines for signs of betrayal or regret? Or is it the king himself, Louis, a monarch who turned France into a mirror of his own glory, yet who could not bear the reflection of one man's face? Your thoughts drift to him more often now. You've never spoken his name aloud in this prison. No one has. But he is everywhere. In the silk-lined books that occasionally appear beside your bed. In the silverware, plain but polished, that arrives with your meals. In the specific blend of wine that only a royal court would bother sending to a prisoner. These aren't luxuries. They're reminders of control, of provenance, of exactly where the leash ends. One night, you write a name, not yours, not his. Just a name that once mattered, buried between lines about the color of autumn leaves. The page is taken. Returned a day later with that single name carefully removed, scraped away with a blade, so fine it left the parchment intact. The message is clear. You may write, but you may not remember out loud. And yet, the cipher continues. You start small again, doubling certain letters, embedding numbers that repeat across unrelated pages. No one responds directly, but more ink appears. More paper. Once, a fine new quill with an ivory handle. It's a conversation, but only one side speaks. You're not being ignored. You're being studied. You begin to suspect there is more than one reader. Some letters vanish and never return. Others come back heavily annotated in the margins, a faint hand correcting your grammar or underlining passages. It's subtle, but distinct. One of them is pedantic. Another has a taste for poetry. You test this by quoting Virgil once, and the next day, a Latin grammar appears among your books. You don't know who they are, but you begin to imagine them as characters, one stern, one romantic, one methodical. You start writing for them. not to escape, but to be understood. Then, for the first time in years, a reply. It's not addressed to you. It isn't even placed directly in your cell. It arrives tucked between the pages of a book left on your desk, a copy of Plutarch's Lives with a folded sheet pressed into the spine. The note is brief, written in a hand too elegant to be hurried. Do you still remember the garden with the statue of Mercury? That's all. No signature, no date. Just a question so specific, it knocks the breath from your lungs. Because you do remember. The statue was bronze. The garden behind the chapel. You were a child. You used to place small stones at its feet, pretending they were offerings. You remember the way the sun struck the metal in the late afternoon, making the god's face glow. You remember that, and the laughter of a girl whose name you no longer speak. That single sentence cracks something open inside you. Not pain, not exactly, but confirmation. Someone out there knows who you are, and that someone has not forgotten. You write back, carefully, obliquely. You do not name the statue. You do not describe the garden. You only mention the way metal turns warm in the sun, and how even silence can echo if it's held long enough. The page vanishes. The book disappears. No response comes. But after that day, things begin to shift. The guards step lighter. The meals improve. The visits from St. Mars grow more frequent, though he still says nothing. You hear new footsteps in the corridor. Soft-souled, deliberate. You aren't the only secret in the Bastille anymore. You can feel others being smuggled in. Questions, rumors, preparations. Something stirs beyond the stone. Then, one morning, a book appears on your desk with a ribbon threaded through the binding. The pages inside are blank. The ribbon is gold. You understand. They want a final record, not just of your days, but of your story. Someone has decided it must be preserved, not erased. You don't know if this is mercy or politics, but it means the nature of your imprisonment is shifting. You're no longer just being kept. You're being documented. And perhaps you think as you dip your pen into the fresh ink, that is even more dangerous. Because if your silence has protected something all these years, and your words, at long last, might expose it. You write, and somewhere in Versailles, the king reads. Your death is not announced. It unfolds the way everything else in your life has unfolded, quietly, deliberately, and without acknowledgement. There's no last confession, no urgent summons for a priest to kneel by your side. No one leans over your bed to whisper, it's time. In the days leading up to it, your body begins its slow retreat. You feel it first in your fingers, clumsy, trembling as you try to hold your pen. Then in your chest, as breathing becomes more of a negotiation than a rhythm. The cough comes next, soft and dry, like a secret your lungs are trying to keep. The guards notice. They always notice. But their reaction is as measured as everything else here. They do not rush. They do not panic. They simply bring cooler water, softer bread, a folded cloth dipped in vinegar and laid across your forehead. You're still treated with care, not affection, not even kindness, just the same polished, ritualized attentiveness that has defined every moment of your imprisonment. The fortress doesn't flinch. It adapts. The physician is summoned. He enters with his leather case, inspecting you with hands that are firm, but impersonal. He doesn't speak your name. He doesn't ask your permission. He listens to your breathing, lifts your wrist, watches your chest rise and fall. He records nothing aloud, just offers a subtle nod to St. Mars, who has been standing near the fireplace, staring not at you, but at the mask that still covers your face. You want to ask what he sees when he looks at it now, just iron and straps, or the memory of the man he's guarded for so many years. But you don't ask. You haven't asked anything in a long time. That night, your meal arrives late and cold. You force yourself to eat a few bites of the stew, tasting thyme and salt, but little else. You drink the wine. It's stronger than usual, almost sweet. A gesture, maybe, or a preparation. You lie down fully clothed, because sitting takes more effort now than you're willing to spend. The mattress is softer than the one you had in St. Marguerite. The sheets are clean, pressed, still carrying the faint scent of lavender wax. The room darkens. The torches outside are dimmed. Somewhere beyond the Bastille's walls, Paris moves on, oblivious. There are carriages clattering over cobblestones, markets closing for the day, candles lit in drawing rooms where men discuss treaties, poetry, revolutions. And while they do, you fade, one breath at a time, like a wax seal melting slowly into nothing. There is no final gasp. No drama. You don't fight it. Not because you're brave, but because you're ready. You've been preparing for this in degrees ever since the first mask was fastened around your face. You close your eyes not with dread, but with curiosity. What happens next? Is there recognition, at last, beyond the veil? A reckoning? A moment where your name, so carefully erased from every document, every order, every whisper, is finally spoken aloud again? If so, it doesn't happen here. The morning comes gray and indifferent. The guards find you cold and still, your hands folded over your chest, the iron masks still fixed in place. They pause only long enough to verify what they already know. One man presses 2 fingers to your neck. Another steps back and nods toward the hallway. They do not touch the mask. Not yet. St. Mars is summoned immediately. He enters the cell with the same solemn poise he's always carried, though now he looks thinner, more brittle around the mouth. He stands beside your bed for a long time, saying nothing. Then he sits, opens a fresh page in his ledger, and writes. The pen scratches softly, methodically, across the parchment. No flourish, no commentary. Just facts, date, time, room, condition, mask present. No spoken words recorded in final hours. Entry complete. You are not buried with honor. You are buried with efficiency. A plain wooden coffin. A small procession. No public announcement. No military salute. The coffin is lowered into the ground under the name Marcaeli, a variation of a name used once in Pinerolo for a prisoner long dead and likely forgotten. The priest reading the burial rites does so with unusual haste. It's likely he doesn't know who you truly were. Or perhaps he does and prefers not to know. The mask is not buried with you. It is cleaned, wrapped in linen, placed in a box sealed with wax, and then quietly removed from the Bastille by an officer who records nothing of the event in any official log. The mask vanishes just as you did. Folded into shadows, its history rewritten by absence. Some say it was melted down in secret. Others claim it was kept, hidden in a vault beneath Versailles, a relic too dangerous to display and too meaningful to destroy. There are those who will swear it changed hands several times after your death, passed between kings like a poisoned jewel. But in truth, no one knows. That silence, the same silence that defined your life, outlives your body. St. Mars dies the following year. The cause isn't listed, but those who served under him say he aged 20 years in the months after your death. He left no confession, no journal, no parting letter. If he ever whispered your name to anyone, they never recorded it. He took the final chapter of your story with him, and whatever secrets he held died as cleanly as the ink he left in his inkwell. And yet, despite their precision, their restraint, their careful covering of every trail, they overlooked one simple truth. Mystery has gravity. The more they tried to suppress your identity, the more irresistible the legend became. Stories began to bloom in your absence, first among the guards, then the staff, and eventually the writers. Rumors leaked from the Bastille's thick walls, carried by dismissed servants and idle soldiers. Each retelling stretched the truth further, until it was no longer a question of who you were, but who you might have been. Were you a twin brother of the king, hidden to preserve the line of succession? A disgraced noble too powerful to execute, too dangerous to release? A lover of the queen? A witness to treason? The possibilities festered in the public imagination, and without an answer, they grew into myth. The Iron Mask, intended to erase you, made you unforgettable. Decades pass, and still your story refuses to lie still. Voltaire writes of you, cloaking his accusations in elegant skepticism. Then Dumas follows, transforming you into legend, a royal twin, a prince smothered in silence. Scholars argue. Records are scoured, portraits examined. None agree, but none forget. Because in the end, they remember you not as a man, but as a question. And now, centuries later, we step into the second half of your story. Not the one you lived, but the one others built around your silence. A tale of wild theories and royal scandals, of missing twins and coded names, of letters burned and reputations erased. We leave the cell and follow the ink trails left behind, on scrolls, in books, and in whispered histories passed between candlelit scholars who still dare to ask, who were you? And why, above all, was your face forbidden? The moment someone whispered that you might have been the king's twin, the mask ceased to be a mere object and became a symbol of something far more dangerous. In a kingdom where lineage defined not only power, but the very structure of law and identity, a duplicate heir was not a curiosity. It was a catastrophe. If you truly were the second son of Anne of Austria, born moments after Louis and hidden away to prevent a dynastic crisis, then your existence would have threatened everything France believed it understood about its monarchy. No man, not even a sun king, could afford such a reflection. One that walked, spoke, and perhaps even ruled in a manner too close to his own. Historians have long struggled with the theory, yet its appeal endures. It offers a motive stronger than mere treason or scandal. It explains not only the mask, but the lifelong silence, the sequence of relocations, the peculiar restraint shown in your treatment. A twin could not be executed. A royal brother could not be paraded through a trial. Instead, he had to be removed with surgical care, stored somewhere unreachable, tended to like a dangerous relic, and erased without ever quite being destroyed. The mask was not punishment. Under this theory, it was containment. Some accounts claim that there were 2 royal births that day, in 1638, that the Queen's labor had lasted longer than expected, that attendants whispered of twins. A midwife's diary, decades later, mentions an unnamed noblewoman asking whether both boys had survived. The palace records are incomplete. Some pages from the court's registry appear deliberately altered. There are references to a second child, whose name never appears again. For those who believe the twin theory, these fragments form a puzzle that, if fully assembled, would show a royal family desperate to protect itself from its own biology. If you were that child, then your crime was nothing more than existing. Your first breath would have triggered a crisis, not because of who you were, but because of what your face represented. 2 identical boys, 1 throne, 1 future. In a world where legitimacy and image mattered more than fairness or logic, there could be no room for ambiguity. And so you were removed, not for rebellion or betrayal, but for symmetry. The illusion of a singular monarch had to be preserved at all costs, and you, unfortunately, were the cost. Under this story, your early years would have been spent in anonymity. Perhaps you were raised in a quiet estate, under careful watch, educated by men sworn to secrecy, surrounded by servants forbidden to speak your name. You may have lived as a noble without knowing your true parentage, or perhaps you were told and understood too well what your existence implied. Eventually, you would have grown into the role that frightened them most. Not a forgotten child, but a man whose every movement, every gesture, mirrored the king's too closely. A rival, not by choice, but by nature. At that point, removal was no longer a distant concern. It became an immediate necessity. Whether it was the result of a moment of recognition, perhaps a noble's startled glance at court, or the gossip of a foreign ambassador noting a resemblance, does not matter. What matters is that the decision was made. You were brought under lock and key. The velvet mask was fastened. The orders were written in secret and sealed with royal authority. From that moment on, your life was not your own. Critics of this theory argue that it leans too heavily on drama. They point out that no official documentation confirms the existence of a second son, that the timeline is speculative, that memories and confessions recorded decades later are unreliable. They remind us that France in the 17th century was filled with intrigues, that false heirs and political fictions were not uncommon, and that many prisoners were treated with mystery to heighten their perceived value. Yet those same critics struggle to explain why so much effort was spent on you, why a single prisoner received more attention, secrecy, and sustained administrative oversight than almost any other confined within the walls of 3 separate fortresses. There are descriptions, some firsthand, some filtered through gossip, of a man who walked with the posture of nobility, who spoke little, but carried himself with the quiet authority of someone who had once commanded respect. One former soldier reportedly said, decades later, that he had seen a tall figure in an iron mask who moved like a prince. A cook dismissed for asking too many questions claimed that the masked man received finer wine than the rest of the prisoners. A priest recalled being instructed never to ask the prisoner's name or to include it in any sacramental record. None of these details prove your royal blood, but taken together, they deepen the suspicion that your importance extended well beyond whatever crime the crown might have attributed to you. The strongest support for the twin theory comes not from documentation, but from behavior. Saint Mars, the warden who followed you from Pinerolo to Sainte Marguerite, and finally to the Bastille, treated you with a consistency and loyalty that suggest more than bureaucratic duty. His insistence on discretion, the resources allocated for your upkeep, and the refusal to permit even minor lapses in security all point to a man following an order of exceptional significance. He was not guarding a political prisoner. He was safeguarding a secret whose exposure might have destabilized the monarchy itself. If you were the king's brother, then your silence kept a nation in balance. Your identity was too volatile to acknowledge, too risky to erase. The mask was not a punishment. It was a strategy. And as the years passed and your existence faded from memory, the French court may have believed the threat was neutralized. Yet they overlooked what would happen after your death. That the very silence they preserved would become the soil from which legend would grow. Writers would seize upon the story, turning you into an icon of betrayal and forgotten blood. Voltaire gave voice to the theory, planting the seed in the Enlightenment imagination. Alexandre Dumas turned it into literature, fiction that clung so tightly to possibility that it has never truly shaken loose. The public, hungry for symbols, took your silence and transformed it into meaning. The Iron Mask became not just a device, but a metaphor, a face erased by politics, a life rewritten by fear. Whether or not you were truly the king's brother may never be known. But the theory remains compelling because it answers a question that no simpler story can. Why was a man kept masked, guarded, and erased for over 3 decades, without a trial, without a name, and without a voice? Now we move from the speculative to the political. If you were not a brother, perhaps you were a traitor, a noble, not by blood, but by betrayal. A man who sat at the table of kings and then dared to act against them. Because even in royal courts, the threat to power does not always come from within the cradle. Sometimes it walks in through the front door, bows, smiles, and then disappears behind a locked door for the rest of its life. If you weren't a prince, then perhaps you were something nearly as dangerous. A nobleman who crossed the king not by birth, but by betrayal. Among the most frequently proposed identities for the masked prisoner is Count Ercole Antonio Mattioli, an Italian diplomat from Mantua. His story, like yours, is one of silence, secrecy, and sudden disappearance. In his case, the motive was political treason, the kind that couldn't simply be punished and forgotten, the kind that required erasure. Mattioli had been entrusted with a delicate mission in the 1670s to facilitate the secret transfer of the fortress of Issal from the Duke of Mantua to the French crown. This was not just a minor property deal. It was a strategic move that would extend Louis XIV's influence into northern Italy and shift the balance of power in the region. France needed the transaction to be invisible, at least until it was complete. But Mattioli betrayed that trust. He sold the secret to France's enemies, the Spanish and Austrians, compromising the entire operation. The French response was swift and ruthless. Not war, not trial, but something far quieter. Mattioli vanished. He was arrested in secret, taken across borders, and confined in the fortress of Pinerolo under the watchful eye of Saint Mars. The timing matches. So do the details. An important prisoner, transported between fortresses, never named, heavily guarded. Many argue that your story begins here, that the mask was not originally placed on royalty, but on a diplomat turned liability. A man who knew too much, said too much, and could never be allowed to speak again. The theory fits neatly in some ways. Mattioli was high-born, but not royal, important enough to justify discretion, but expendable enough to vanish without shaking the crown. His actions had embarrassed France at a diplomatic level, and Louis XIV was not a king who tolerated public humiliation. Locking him away, denying him the dignity of a name or a voice, would have been the perfect way to make him disappear without martyring him. But if you were Mattioli, then the mask becomes a strange form of theater. It wasn't designed to preserve your life, but to erase your identity so thoroughly that no one would ever find a cause to rescue you. The question then becomes, why go to such lengths for a man who had simply passed along a secret? The betrayal was severe, yes, but not unprecedented. Why the mask? Why the decades of confinement? The personal oversight of Saint Mars, the transfers, the orders from Versailles. Some historians argue that Mattioli must have known more than we think, that he had access not only to state secrets, but to personal ones, that his betrayal reached beyond diplomacy and into the private affairs of the king himself. Perhaps he had letters, or perhaps he had seen something, a signature, a royal interaction, a financial exchange that could not be allowed to surface. Under this theory, the mask was not just punishment. It was protection, not for you, but for the king. Others say the Mattioli theory is a case of mistaken identity, that Mattioli was imprisoned, yes, but died years before the masked prisoner arrived at the Bastille. The records are murky, filled with aliases and duplicated names. In one entry, the prisoner is listed as Eustache Dogger. In another, as Marcaili. The names overlap just enough to confuse historians, but not enough to confirm anything. It's possible that Mattioli's imprisonment was later folded into your story, an administrative error turned historical mystery. But the most intriguing aspect of this theory lies in the response it provoked. If you were Mattioli, your mask served as a warning to others, a symbol that betrayal would not only be punished, it would be erased. That no matter how prominent you were, no matter how carefully you maneuvered among diplomats and kings, the crown would silence you with absolute precision. A duel fought with secrets, not swords. And yet, your treatment was never crude. You were not tortured or left to rot in filth. You were maintained, fed, moved under cover of darkness. You were kept in relative comfort, as though the crime had not severed your worth entirely. Perhaps the king felt that your betrayal, while unforgivable, was understandable. Perhaps he even admired the boldness of it. But admiration did not spare you. It only refined your sentence. The irony, of course, is that if you were Mattioli, your efforts to expose secrets only created a greater one. The man who sought to pull back the veil on diplomacy became the most veiled figure in France. And over time, your own identity disappeared beneath the weight of speculation. The specifics of your treason faded. The exact nature of your offense blurred. All that remained was the mask, and the fact that you wore it until your death. Yet questions persist. Why did Saint Mars treat you as if you carried royal blood? Why did the king's men use coded instructions to manage your confinement? Why was your burial done under a false name, with no public record of your crimes? If you were merely a diplomat turned traitor, why the extraordinary measures? Historians still debate whether the Mattioli theory explains too much or too little. On one hand, it offers a name, a motive, and a historical context. On the other, it does not account for the layers of security and silence that followed you for more than 30 years. You may have betrayed the king once, but the crown spent a lifetime making sure no one could betray you back by speaking your truth. The idea that you were a nobleman punished for a singular act of betrayal reframes the mask not as a shield for the monarchy, but as a blindfold for the world. And perhaps that was the point, to draw attention away from the details, to allow you to fade into anonymity, while the myth grew stronger than any single truth ever could. But if you were not a brother or a diplomat, perhaps you were someone even more forgettable. And that, ironically, might make your silence all the more unsettling. Because what if you were a servant? What if you were not powerful at all? What if you simply saw something you were never supposed to see? If you were neither prince nor diplomat, then perhaps you were something far smaller, at least in the eyes of the court. A man without title, without property, without political leverage. Not an heir, not an enemy general, not a traitorous count. Just a valet, a servant. One of the invisible people who moved through palaces without being noticed, who poured the wine, tied the sashes, fetched the letters. And yet, in a place like Versailles, the smallest ears sometimes heard the most dangerous things. There is a theory, quiet, persistent, that you were a valet named Eustache Dogger. Not a noble, not a politician, not a twin, but a man who simply heard too much. Your master, if the stories are to be believed, was involved in something delicate, treason, heresy, scandal. Perhaps he belonged to the wrong faction, or entertained guests whose names were too controversial to repeat. Maybe he was part of a conspiracy that barely failed, or a financial scheme too embarrassing for the crown to expose. Or perhaps it wasn't treason at all. Perhaps it was just a secret that cut too close to the king's private life. Something personal, not political. You were loyal, but you were there. And being there was the problem. In this version of the story, you served the powerful quietly, diligently, and without the protections of birth. You moved through chambers, overheard whispers, glimpsed sealed letters, and perhaps bore witness to one conversation that you should never have heard. Maybe you didn't understand what you'd seen at first. Maybe you tried to forget. But even a moment's hesitation in a court of intrigue is enough to seal a fate. Someone panicked. Someone wrote a note. And within weeks, you were arrested, interrogated, and removed from the world. Not because of what you did, but because of what you knew. If you were Dogger, your name may have been used in the earliest prison registers. Indeed, records from Pinerolo and Sainte Marguerite list a man by that name, a prisoner assigned to Saint Mars, whose arrival coincides with the first whispers of a masked captive. The details are vague, the handwriting difficult to decipher, but there is enough there to form a thread. Dogger arrived. He was to be kept under strict silence. No one was to speak to him. He was not to speak to anyone. The orders were clear and strangely formal. Even Saint Mars, a man known for precision, appears unusually cautious in his letters when referencing this prisoner. He never names you fully. He refers to the one I spoke to you about, or the individual under special instruction. This circumspect language suggests that even he was not allowed to write your name directly. as if the name itself could betray something deeper. If you were a valet, then your entire imprisonment becomes a matter of containment, not of your person, but of the knowledge you carried. You were never tortured, not because of mercy, but because silence was all that was required. The mask ensured no one would see your face and recognize you. The isolation prevented you from repeating what you'd heard. Your presence in the prison system was obscured, replaced with aliases. Your movements were documented without names. You became a cipher, a body without a label. This theory casts your story in a different light. It strips away the royal mystery and replaces it with bureaucratic fear. You are not a threat to the throne, but to its image. A reminder that even kings speak carelessly when they believe no one is listening. And once that illusion is broken, the mask becomes not a barrier, but a lid, sealing the jar so tightly that no truth, however minor, can escape. What elevates this theory beyond mere conjecture is the unusual treatment you received. Despite your presumed low status, you were housed in private cells, given decent meals, treated with a form of subdued dignity. You were not beaten. You were not tossed into a dungeon with the rabble. Saint Mars personally oversaw your transfers. Your confinement followed you like a shadow, across prisons and islands, across decades. No one ever risked relaxing the rules. And yet, there is something odd about this level of care. If you were truly a servant, why devote so many resources to your silence? Why not simply have you removed permanently? A poison slipped into wine, a staged accident. The court had no shortage of options. Instead, they built a framework of silence around you, so elaborate it has endured for centuries. That suggests you heard something far more significant than idle gossip. Some speculate it was related to the affair of the poisons, a scandal that rocked the French court with accusations of sorcery, murder, and corruption at the highest levels. Nobles, priests, and even royal mistresses were implicated. If you witnessed a meeting, carried a vial, delivered a note, even unintentionally, you might have known enough to unravel powerful reputations. Others suspect it was financial, knowledge of bribes, or of foreign payments that could have stained the king's image. Or perhaps it was more intimate, a secret involving the king's private life, something unspeakable, not because it was criminal, but because it was unseemly. Whatever the truth, your silence served its purpose. The scandal, if there was one, died with you. The names were buried. The reputation of the court remained intact. Versailles glittered. The monarchy continued. You, meanwhile, remained a shadow, passed from one locked door to another until the end. Some dismiss this theory precisely because it is too small. They say a servant could not have inspired such careful handling. But that argument overlooks one crucial detail. Power does not always fear force. Sometimes it fears exposure. And the most dangerous man in the palace is not always the one with a sword. Sometimes he's the one holding the tray. You may never have held power. You may never have asked for any of this. But once you knew what you were not supposed to know, you became more than a man. You became a liability. And liabilities must be silenced, not punished, forgotten, not named. If this was your story, then the mask was not a symbol of shame. It was a seal. And the secret you carried, whatever it was, remains locked beneath it even now. But not everyone was willing to let the silence remain. Because not long after your death, a voice began to rise. One that had walked the same halls as you. One that recognized the weight of silence for what it truly was. Voltaire. Voltaire never liked silence. Not when it was enforced. Not when it was convenient. And certainly not when it came from the crown. By the time he began asking questions about you, nearly 3 decades had passed since your death. You were buried, renamed, erased. But Voltaire, who had a particular talent for finding the sore spots of power and poking at them until they turned purple, did not believe the official stories. He suspected there was more to the mask than France had let on. And in a strange twist of fate, he found himself in the perfect place to start pulling at the threads, inside the Bastille itself. When he arrived at the prison in 1717, imprisoned not for violence or treason, but for sarcasm, the crime of wounding royal pride, Voltaire walked the same cold corridors where you had once paced, silenced, hidden, and alone. He was no stranger to scandal, but even he must have felt the weight of your absence echoing down those halls. Guards whispered about you. Fellow prisoners swapped fragments of stories. And while most of France had moved on from your mystery, Voltaire became fascinated. Here, at last, was a riddle perfectly suited to a man who hated unquestioned authority and loved clever puzzles. The account Voltaire eventually published would become one of the most enduring versions of your story. He claimed you were a man of noble birth, that you had been imprisoned for decades under extraordinary secrecy, that your face had been hidden by a mask, not of velvet, as others had said, but of iron, and most scandalously, that your crime had something to do with the king himself. He stopped short of saying you are a royal twin, but the implication was loud enough to carry across Europe. Voltaire's version transformed your story from a court secret into a myth. Suddenly, you weren't just a mysterious prisoner. You were a symbol of royal paranoia, of absolutist cruelty, of how far a monarch would go to protect his throne. Voltaire never claimed to have seen the mask himself, but he claimed to have spoken with men who had: guards, attendants, Bastille officials. Whether those conversations ever took place is impossible to confirm. But Voltaire's influence was such that facts became almost secondary. His pen reshaped memory, and what had once been a prisoner's shame became a nation's curiosity. Of course, the authorities were furious. They dismissed his claims as fantasy, accused him of exaggeration, and tried to bury the subject all over again. But it was too late. Once your story had left the prison walls, it could not be contained. And Voltaire, ever the showman, knew exactly how to fan the flames. He didn't offer too much detail, just enough to keep the mystery alive. Just enough to make people ask, who was this man that even the Enlightenment's greatest skeptic could not explain away? Some historians believe Voltaire simply made you up, or, at the very least, that he conflated several prisoners into one compelling legend. The Bastille held many men. Some were nobles fallen from favor. Others were obscure figures caught in the machinery of court politics. And the name Eustache d'Ager appears multiple times in prison logs, muddying the waters further. But Voltaire didn't seem to care about the administrative confusion. He cared about the power of the story. A man imprisoned for knowing something. A face too dangerous to be seen. A monarch willing to rewrite a life to protect his image. What made Voltaire's curiosity so dangerous wasn't just that he asked questions. It was that he knew how to make others ask them too. He understood that stories spread faster than decrees. That a whispered legend, once turned into ink, could outlive even the longest reign. He didn't just revive your memory. He gave it a new costume, one that would stick far longer than any official report. The iron mask, heavy and dramatic, became the perfect symbol for what he saw as the suffocating nature of absolute power. And he wasn't alone for long. As Enlightenment thinkers challenged the authority of kings and the divine right to rule, your story became a favorite example of everything wrong with monarchy. You were cited in debates, printed in pamphlets, and eventually fictionalized in books. Voltaire had cracked the door open. Others would blow it wide. Even so, Voltaire never settled on a single theory. Sometimes you were a noble caught in political crossfire. Sometimes you were a relative of the king. Sometimes you were simply too valuable to be seen. That vagueness wasn't a flaw. It was a feature. It made your story flexible, useful, provocative. And it let people project their own fears and suspicions onto your fate. Perhaps Voltaire never intended to solve the mystery at all. Perhaps what he wanted was to make the silence surrounding you louder than any official answer. In doing so, he turned you into a question France couldn't unask, a ghost in the archives, a prisoner whose mask reflected not just his face, but the face of the system that placed it there. Even today, historians argue about how much of Voltaire's account was based on fact. There is no confirmed record of a man in an actual iron mask. Most references speak of velvet, cloth, or leather, but iron caught the imagination. It felt heavier, more theatrical, more unjust. And perhaps that's what Voltaire was aiming for all along. Not a historical account, but a metaphor in human form. A warning that behind every golden throne is a cell. And sometimes, in that cell, there's a man who knows too much. By giving you a voice, Voltaire ensured that you would never fully disappear. You may have died in silence, but your story did not. It was passed from prison guards to poets, from skeptics to revolutionaries, until it reached a novelist who would turn it into something even more enduring. Because just when it seemed the mystery might settle into the background, Alexandre Dumas arrived with ink, ambition, and a flair for drama that would make your legend truly immortal. By the time Alexandre Dumas turned his attention to your story, the mystery of your existence had already grown dense with shadows and contradictions. You were a legend by then, part rumor, part echo, and part cautionary tale. But Dumas didn't want just a puzzle to solve. He wanted a myth to sculpt, a tale so grand and tragic that it would not only captivate readers, but reframe history as something operatic and unforgettable. He didn't just breathe life into your legend. He gave it theatrical lungs, dramatic lighting, and a literary heartbeat that would echo for centuries. In the Vicomte of Braise-Lawn, the final installment of his sprawling musketeer saga, Dumas placed you right at the burning center of courtly intrigue. You weren't a diplomat, nor a disgraced valet. You were the king's secret twin, born to the same mother on the same day, but hidden to protect the throne from rivalry. And not just hidden, but condemned to a life of silence, obscurity, and enforced anonymity. It wasn't your fault that you existed, but your existence, according to Dumas, was enough to make you dangerous. This wasn't just good storytelling, it was masterful myth-making. Because in crafting you as Louis XIV's identical brother, he touched on something deeper than politics or power. He created a metaphor for the parts of history that are locked away, for the truth that kings bury in dungeons, and for the unanswerable question of what it means to be erased, not because of something you did, but because of something you are. Readers devoured the book. They mourned your fate. They admired your quiet nobility and shared in the frustration of your redemption. Because in Dumas telling, your escape almost happens. There's a daring plot. Musketeers ride. Masks come off. For a brief, breathless moment, it seems like the real king might be replaced with the better man. But fate, or perhaps history itself, intervenes. The plan fails. You are returned to the Bastille, and the iron mask is placed back over your face, tighter than ever. Dumas didn't try to answer the historical questions. He wasn't a historian. He was a dramatist. But he understood the emotional truths behind power. And what he offered readers wasn't a dry theory. It was a feeling that injustice had been done, that the system had crushed something pure, that somewhere, behind stone walls and silence, a man had lost his life not in body, but in name, in memory, and in voice. His portrayal of you was unusually sympathetic. You weren't mad. You weren't vengeful. You weren't even ambitious. You were dignified, composed, almost saintly. And in that restraint, Dumas gave you the moral high ground. You became the embodiment of everything the real king was not. Where Louis XIV basked in gold and flattery, you waited in silence. Where the court played games, you endured solitude. Dumas made sure readers saw the contrast, and they never forgot it. It didn't matter that the story was fiction, or that the twin theory was almost certainly impossible. What mattered was that it felt true. It felt right. And that's the power of a good myth. It replaces what we know with what we need. And what people needed in the France of Dumas' time was a way to make sense of the centuries of royal excess that had led to revolution, bloodshed, and exile. You, the masked man, became a mirror held up to the past, a quiet reminder of the price of unchecked rule. And as the myth took root, it began to grow beyond the page. Theaters adapted the story for stage. Painters imagined your cell, your mask, your final walk through the Bastille's echoing corridors. Journalists began referencing you as if you had truly been royal. And when cinema arrived, your face, hidden though it was, found a new kind of immortality. The 1929 silent film The Iron Mask, starring Douglas Fairbanks, portrayed you as a noble figure unjustly imprisoned, a tale of brotherhood and betrayal. Later versions, like the 1977 TV adaptation with Richard Chamberlain or the 1998 film with Leonardo DiCaprio, leaned even harder into the twin theory. Some added romance, others vengeance. But always, at the center, was the mask and the question, who was the man behind it? What's curious is how Dumas' version eclipsed every previous theory. Even as historians continued to publish sober biographies and dusty monographs, pointing to diplomats, servants, or minor nobles, the public imagination clung to Dumas fiction. It was simply more compelling, more tragic, more elegant. And once a myth becomes emotionally true, it no longer matters if it's factually correct. But perhaps the most lasting consequence of Dumas' work was how it reshaped you into a symbol. You were no longer just a prisoner. You became an allegory, a stand-in for the voiceless, a representation of those whose lives are controlled by others, whose names are erased from record, whose suffering becomes the background music of empire. And once Dumas gave you that role, every retelling added a layer of reverence. You were no longer just forgotten. You were sacred. There's something oddly poetic about the fact that Dumas, a man of mixed race and illegitimate birth, would give such care and dignity to a character defined by the denial of identity. It's as though he saw something of himself in you, not in the literal story, but in the broader experience of being set aside, of being made invisible by systems that insist on only one truth at a time. And in that light, your mask becomes not just a plot device, but a profound symbol. A face covered not because of shame or crime, but because its very existence challenged the power structures that claim to be unshakable. The irony, of course, is that the more the monarchy tried to silence you, the louder your story became. And by the time Dumas was done, you were no longer just a historical oddity. You were legend. Yet Dumas never claimed ownership of your truth. He knew it was unsolvable. That was part of the allure. He didn't try to crack the mystery. He added to it, gave it texture, raised the stakes, and then he left it in our hands, knowing that your silence would speak louder than any conclusion ever could. Even now, your story continues to be retold. Each generation dresses you differently. In some versions, you escape. In others, you die peacefully. In others still, you become something more, a ghost, a warning, a mythic figure haunting the edges of history. And while the records gather dust and the prison stones crumble, your name, whatever it truly was, remains on our lips. But behind all the fictions, all the romantic retellings, and all the literary flourishes, the same basic question remains. What was it really like to live in the Bastille? To sit in that cell with the mask on, not for a day or a week, but for decades? It's time to return to that cell now, to the cold walls, the muffled footsteps, the silence that stretched out like a second skin. Because legend or not, myth or man, that was your world. And that's where we go next. Your cell has long since gone quiet. The dust has settled, the torch smoke cleared, and the key that once turned in your lock has been swallowed by time. And yet, long after your death, the world continues to circle your story like a vulture around a fading outline in the sand. No matter how many centuries pass, no matter how many archivists scrape through yellowed parchment, or how many scholars rearrange fragments on the table, the puzzle of your life remains forever missing its most vital pieces. And perhaps that's what makes you so endlessly magnetic. Not what is known, but what was taken away. The basics are maddeningly vague. A man, moved from prison to prison, never named in full, held in conditions both strict and strangely luxurious. You are escorted by the same warden across 3 separate facilities over more than 3 decades. First Pinerolo, then Sainte Marguerite, and finally the Bastille. At each stop, your isolation is scrupulously maintained. No visitors, no conversations, no letters that survive. And yet, you're fed well. You sleep in a bed. You wear fine linen, not rags. When your cell is cleaned after your death, every object is burned. Even the forks and spoons are melted down. The furniture is destroyed. The bed frame taken apart. The room whitewashed. Your name on the burial certificate is fake. If you were merely another forgotten prisoner, then why all this effort to erase every trace? Historians pore over what's left like diviners staring at cracked bones. The prison ledgers are inconsistent. Names are entered and then crossed out. One appears more than others, as Dogger, but it's uncertain whether that was your real name or simply a placeholder. Some believe you were a valet, punished for overhearing a nobleman's treasonous confession. Others argue you were involved in the affair of the poisons, a scandal so toxic it threatened to unravel the very court of Louis XIV. And then there are those who insist you are royalty. An illegitimate son, a brother, a rival, the twin who had to disappear for the other to rule. The theories multiply, each with enough shadowy evidence to suggest possibility, but never enough to confirm. Even your defining feature, the mask, is surrounded by contradiction. The earliest accounts describe a mask made of black velvet, not iron, a cloth meant to cover the lower face. No hinges, no bolts, no mouthpiece. Just something soft and smothering, like silence made visible. And yet, over the years, that velvet becomes iron in the popular imagination. Voltaire strengthens the image. Dumas burnishes it. And then cinema picks it up and carries it forward until the idea of an actual iron mask becomes more familiar than any document ever was. But the question lingers. Did you ever wear such a thing at all? Or was the mask just a symbol? Something imagined by a world desperate to visualize your suffering, even when the truth was more bureaucratic, more tedious, more quietly cruel. You are clearly someone important enough to watch, dangerous enough to silence, but not important enough to kill outright. That is perhaps the strangest part. You were kept alive, fed, guarded, moved carefully from place to place like a fragile package with a label that no one was allowed to read. Some letters from St. Mars, your jailer for over 30 years, describe your needs being met with fastidious attention. He requests books for you, notes your clothing, monitors your health. You are not forgotten in your cell. You are deliberately maintained. Not like a prisoner, like a secret. Even your silence confuses. For decades, you do not protest. You do not try to escape. You follow instructions. When you are moved, you walk without resistance. When fed, you eat. There are no records of outbursts, no notes passed in desperation. Were you broken early on? Or did you believe that compliance would one day earn your freedom? Or were you protecting someone else? Someone you loved more than you feared the stone walls around you? Historians still wonder if that obedience was your choice, or the result of a mind slowly withering in the dark. Perhaps most maddening is the lack of any definitive motive. If you were punished for what you knew, why not simply silence you permanently? If you were political, why not exile? If you were royal, why hide your very face and bury your name in cement? The scale of your imprisonment doesn't match the punishment for a minor crime. And yet, it also seems oddly excessive for someone whose identity could bring down a throne. The contradiction is part of what makes the mystery so potent. You are simultaneously too important and not important enough. The deeper one digs into your story, the more it slips away. Official reports contradict each other. Memoirs are vague, dates conflict, and every so-called expert builds their theory on the same set of fractured facts. You are an echo stretched across centuries, a cipher that rewrites itself with every generation. You are no longer a man. You are a prism through which the fears, obsessions, and fantasies of the world are reflected back. And yet the emotional core of your story, the thing that keeps people up at night, is not the mask, nor the royal scandal, nor even the missing name. It's the years, the sheer weight of them. The idea of sitting in silence for 3 decades, watched always, spoken to never, waiting for something to change that never will. That kind of waiting becomes its own prison, more potent than iron or stone. And the fact that your story ends not with a revelation, but with a burial under a false name, is what makes it feel so endlessly tragic. There is no closure, no twist, just quiet. But it's in that quiet that your legend lives. Each unanswered question keeps you alive. Each hole in the record gives room for new theories, new fiction, new meaning. You are not just a mystery from history. You are the embodiment of history's blind spots, the proof that for every known king, there is someone in a cell whose name we're not allowed to say. And as the dust continues to settle over the archives, and as your name fades ever further into speculation, there is one final setting where your story refuses to die, the very prison that held you last. The Bastille, its towers long since torn down, its cells emptied by time, was once your final world. Its cold corridors echoed your footsteps. Its walls swallowed your voice. But inside those walls, you are not alone. Others live there too. Some with masks, most without. And in those final years, when the shadows deepened and your years were almost done, your story joined theirs. Because what truly happened to you, the man behind the legend, cannot be separated from the place that tried to contain you. So now we turn our steps once more into the stone chambers of the Bastille, to hear not only your silence, but the lives of others who shared your fate in that cold and watching place. The Bastille stands at the eastern edge of Paris, its 8 grim towers rising from the earth like clenched fists. It's not the most beautiful structure, not like the Louvre or the palaces at Versailles, but it doesn't need to be. The Bastille isn't designed to impress. It's designed to vanish you. And once you step inside its thick stone walls, the city outside may as well be a myth. Sounds become distant. Light feels borrowed. Time dissolves into something flat and colorless, like paper soaked through and dried again. Inside the Bastille, life doesn't end. It just stretches. As you walk its echoing corridors in your mind, you feel how its very design conspires against memory. Everything is meant to be symmetrical, confusing, interchangeable. You turn a corner, and it looks exactly like the one before it. Stairwells that double back on themselves. Cells layered vertically and connected only by narrow, creaking steps. Guards speak softly. Torches flicker. The air is always just a little colder than you expect. It smells of damp linen, of ink, of wax, and worn stone. And through it all is the silence, that unmistakable hum of too many thoughts trapped in too small a space. You are not the only ghost that walked these halls. The Bastille was home to hundreds of prisoners over the years, some famous, some utterly forgotten. Voltaire was imprisoned here twice. The Marquis de Sade was confined in one of the upper towers, where he reportedly passed the time writing and screaming insults at passers-by. Even prisoners of war were occasionally housed here, their foreign tongues adding an eerie layer of incomprehension to the already disorienting soundscape. And then there were men like you, prisoners whose names were whispered, whose faces were rarely seen, whose charges were never publicly explained. What makes the Bastille so haunting is not just the isolation, but the inequality embedded in every brick. If you had wealth or status, or simply knew the right minister, you could live in a furnished room with a fireplace, a desk, and even your own valet. Meals might arrive warm from nearby taverns. Wine was allowed, letters sometimes, visitors if they didn't ask too many questions. It was, in those cases, a kind of forced retreat rather than a true punishment, a luxurious timeout. But if you didn't have those connections, then your cell might be cold, damp, and infested with rats, the bedding moldy, the walls sweating with old rain. Even in confinement, class divided the living. One man might sip claret beside a window. Another might be chained to a wall, 2 floors down, never seeing the sky. And sometimes, one could become the other. Fortunes shifted, bribes dried up, and when they did, so too did the comforts. No one in the Bastille was ever safe, not from loneliness, not from politics, and certainly not from the slow erosion of the self. You hear stories from the guards. A man locked up for publishing a pamphlet. Another held because he insulted the king's mistress. A third arrested in error and kept because no one wanted to admit the mistake. The Bastille's cells were filled with such stories. Men whose lives had been paused like music on a broken gramophone, waiting for someone to remember the tune. Some stayed for weeks, others for decades. The prison operated under letters de cachet, royal orders that required no trial, no explanation, and no appeal. If your name was on one, you disappeared. That was it. No defense, no formal accusation. Sometimes families requested them to hush up scandals. Sometimes ministers used them for petty revenge. Sometimes the king simply wanted quiet. The result was always the same. A door closing, a lock turning, and a life suddenly put on hold. But even among all the stories, yours remained singular. Guards were told never to speak your name aloud. Food was brought by hand-selected attendants. You had no cellmate, no court date, no notes written and left behind for future historians. Only silence, deliberate, total. You became part of the very walls. A rumor that the other prisoners passed down in lowered voices. The man in the mask lives in the tower. He arrived in secret. He's a noble. No, a servant. No, the king's own brother. In a place already steeped in mystery, you were the deepest well. Over the years, new prisoners arrived and were released. Guards were replaced. Ministers rose and fell, but you remained. When the wind blew down the corridor, it carried the same stale secrets past your door. When footsteps echoed at night, they passed your cell without pause. Even the rats came to know your scent, scurrying along the edges of the stone where the torchlight didn't reach. You were a fixture, but never familiar. A presence, but never a person. And still, the Bastille endured. Decades passed. The stones didn't shift. The guards didn't question. The records stayed vague. Visitors would sometimes pass through and note the heavy hush of the place, remarking on its order, its cleanliness, its strange absence of noise. But behind those neat exteriors was a tension that never eased. Everyone in the Bastille knew its silence wasn't just a condition. It was an edict, a performance, a mask that the entire fortress wore. When you died, your absence did not end the legend. It began it. The guards burned your furniture, melted your utensils. They said nothing, wrote nothing. Let the burial certificate misname you. It was not closure. It was concealment. But that concealment didn't work. Instead of burying your story, they fed it. And the fortress, already saturated with forgotten voices, took on one more yours. The most lasting one. The most unknowable. Even now, the Bastille has been gone for centuries. Torn down during the Revolution. Its stones sold, scattered, reused in other buildings. But when people stand in the Place de la Bastille today, they still speak your name, still wonder which tower was yours, still imagine your masked face staring out from behind iron bars that no longer exist. In a way, you outlasted the fortress. The others are footnotes. You are the headline. But for every whisper about you, there were others, silent companions in suffering, forgotten prisoners who left behind even fewer traces. And as we walk now through the final chambers of this cold and vanishing place, we'll hear their stories too, not just yours. Because to understand the prison is to understand the people inside it, not just the man with the mask, but the masked system itself. You wouldn't expect a prison to have cozy corners, but then again, the Bastille was no ordinary prison. If you had the right name, or the right friends, or the right balance of usefulness and discretion, then your cell might look surprisingly like a modest study in a country estate. A fireplace, for instance, not grand, not gilded, but real. Crackling logs, a steady warmth, and that kind of smoke that doesn't just heat the air, but softens the sound. A table and chair might sit nearby, perhaps a narrow bed with a blanket that's clean rather than coarse. A writing desk, if you knew how to wield a pen without stirring trouble. And candles, always candles. The kind that leave wax puddled and light, flickering long into the evenings. This was the paradox of privilege inside the Bastille. The prison did not treat all its residents equally, and if you entered with social standing still attached to your name, that invisible crown bought you a gentler captivity. Your door would still lock, but your meals might arrive in porcelain bowls. The guards might greet you with a polite nod rather than a grunt. You might even hear music, if another prisoner with taste and favor had been allowed to keep a violin or a harpsichord upstairs. Confinement, yes, but not deprivation. Imagine sitting in such a room, knowing you're a prisoner, but able to tuck your feet beside the fire, hearing it pop and shift as if trying to whisper a bedtime story of its own. Outside, the corridors are dark and damp, but in your cell, the stones are warm, the air is dry, and the minutes don't tick with the same kind of hunger. You're not free, but you're not suffering either. Not in body, at least. Yet this version of a cell was not a kindness. It was a mask of another kind, one designed to soothe the jailer's conscience more than the prisoner's soul. A warm room does not cancel out a closed door. A fire does not chase away the silence that wraps around your days. The Bastille could be gentle when it chose, but it never let you forget who was in control. Even the comforts had strings attached. Misstep, and they vanished. Speak too boldly in a letter, and the books might be taken away. Ask too often about your sentence, and your evening stew might grow thinner. The warmth was conditional, like sunlight behind clouds that never quite part. There's a record of one prisoner who arrived with a title and a fortune, and within weeks had arranged to have his own valet inside the cell. Not a fellow inmate, mind you, an actual servant, paid to keep his master comfortable. Meals were ordered from a favorite restaurant in Paris and brought through the prison gates, steaming and fragrant. The prisoner had a dressing gown delivered. He was, in every physical sense, more comfortable inside the Bastille than many of Paris's poor were on the street. But the difference, of course, was that he could not leave. His evenings stretched long, and even with brandy and velvet slippers, he could not unlock his door. And there were moments when these comforts made things worse. Because the nicer the room, the more it resembled life outside, and the crueler the reminder that real life was just out of reach. A visitor's laugh in the courtyard below might jolt you back to the present. A bird perched on the narrow sill might bring tears to your eyes. The scent of pipe smoke from a guard's break might remind you of your brother's study, or your father's library, or some warm hallway now forever locked away in memory. For many, it was the evenings that struck hardest. After dinner, when the guards retreated and the fire dimmed, the quiet became thicker than the walls. A page of writing, if you were permitted ink, felt heavier at night. A book's final sentence would echo too long in the room. The scratching of mice in the corners seemed louder than any orchestra. It was then that even the richest cell felt like a crypt dressed in velvet. And those with less? Their nights held no illusions, no fireplaces, no books, no servants, only stone and straw, and the constant drip of water somewhere beyond reach. They dreamed not of freedom, but of warmth. A single candle, a piece of cheese, the click of a key that turned for them just once. The class divide didn't vanish in the Bastille, it calcified. You could walk past 20 doors and hear 20 different kinds of suffering, some too quiet to notice, some too loud to forget. But still, the Bastille maintained its order. The guards recorded their rounds. The ministers logged the expenses. The jailers ensured that those with means received what they paid for, and those without learned to survive on little. And above it all was the unspoken understanding that even the finest cell was still a trap, that a fireplace did not make you a guest, that warmth was no substitute for a voice. You, too, knew this. Even if your room had a rug, a desk, a plate of meat and fruit at dinner, it was all decoration around a single truth. The key was never yours. Whether your mask was cloth or iron, velvet or silence, you wore it just the same. And no hearth, no matter how kindly it crackled, could ever replace the freedom of your name. Yet it is these rooms, the warm ones, the painted ones, the rare chambers where books were read and music hummed, that survive best in memory. Visitors to the Bastille, years later, would marvel at how civilized it all appeared. It wasn't so bad, some would say, but they never stayed past dusk. They never heard the way silence presses in when the fire dies low, and the only sound left is your own heartbeat. Next, we'll visit those other rooms, the ones without fire, the ones without servants, the ones that smelled not of books and lemon oil, but of mildew, rust, and resignation. The true weight of the Bastille rests not in its exceptional cells, but in the ones history tried to forget. If you find yourself in the lower levels of the Bastille, far below the towers and their polite solitude, the story changes. Here, the air is not so clean. It tastes of salt and rot and stale sweat, like something trapped and fermented over decades. The walls leak. The ceilings droop. The light, when there is any, is a dull smear that never quite reaches the corners. You press your back against the stone, trying not to sink into the damp, and realize it makes little difference. The cold finds you anyway. It seeps into your bones like it belongs there. There's no fireplace here, no desk, no narrow bed with a woolen blanket. What you get is a platform of wood, or maybe straw if someone remembered, and a bucket in the corner that smells like it hasn't been emptied in days. You are not alone. You share this cell with 1, 2, sometimes even 3 others. Men you don't know, men who might not speak your language, men who sleep too close, breathe too loud, and dream with fists clenched. There is no such thing as personal space. Only shared air and the occasional shuffle of chains. Breathing becomes communal. Shivering becomes synchronized. The cell doesn't allow you to forget that you are part of a mass. Not a man, but one more body in a pile of damp. Because yes, chains are still used here. Not always the dramatic kind. No manacles hanging from the wall, but ankle restraints, iron cuffs, and occasionally full leg irons fastened to rings in the floor. Not to punish, just to keep you still. Some men are locked by day and unchained at night, others the reverse. It depends less on your crime and more on your temperament or the guard's mood. Sometimes the guards lose the key or claim to, and the lock becomes permanent until a superior notices. The iron scrapes into your skin and leaves red, wet grooves. Eventually, those grooves become part of you, calloused and discolored, like the ring of rust left behind when a kettle sits too long on a wet table. The rats don't mind. They don't care about class or sentence. They squeeze through cracks in the floorboards, slip down from upper levels, or emerge directly from the sewage troughs, fat and quick and utterly fearless. At night, you feel them skittering over your feet, brushing your fingers. They are part of the furniture now. Some prisoners name them. Some try to feed them crumbs of crust. Others lash out with sticks or fists, only to find they can't strike fast enough in the dark. One man once tried to strangle one barehanded and succeeded, but the others came back the next night, bolder than before. Some nights, you think you hear them arguing in the corners, whispering in a language just out of reach. If you're unlucky enough to be injured or ill in a cell like this, help is sparse. The prison has a physician, but he doesn't visit often. And when he does, his medicine consists of leeches and boiled herbs and vague mutterings about imbalance and humors. Fevers linger. Wounds fester. If you vomit, someone mops it with a rag that's never clean. If you faint, someone else will simply step over you. The guards might call for help if you're quiet about it, but if you make too much noise, they might just shut the door and walk away. In some cases, the doctor does not even arrive. Instead, a guard gives you wine with herbs floating in it and says, "This helps." It doesn't, but at least it warms your throat for a moment. And yet, even here, humanity finds strange ways to endure. One man hums lullabies before sleep, not for others, but for himself. Another scrawls poems on the wall using coal, though no one knows how he learned to write. A third, near the edge of madness, insists he is Napoleon, even though Bonaparte won't be born for another 30 years. These men, like you, are trying to keep something alive in themselves. A memory, a rhythm, a piece of identity not yet stripped away by mildew and silence. Sometimes the men share stories, long rambling tales half remembered from childhood, their voices just above whispers. One tells of a dog he once had, another of a girl who used to braid his sister's hair. None of it is relevant. All of it is sacred. Not everyone survives. Some are taken out, stiff and cold, bundled in rough cloth and buried quickly in the pauper's field. Others are released, but emerge blinking and hunched, uncertain how to walk in full sunlight again. A few vanish without record, like paper burned before anyone reads it. Perhaps transferred, perhaps buried deeper, perhaps simply erased. The rest are left behind to wonder whether their own endings will be recorded at all. You start to measure your existence not in years or seasons, but in the slow disintegration of the straw under you, the way the mildew moves across the wall like a tide chart. And through it all, the guards rotate. Some are cruel, some indifferent. A rare few are kind in small, forgettable ways. A smuggled crust of bread, a wink, a whispered word that breaks the rules. But kindness can be dangerous. Show too much, and they are reassigned. You learn to be grateful for small consistencies instead. A guard who forgets to lock your chain one night. One who whistles tunelessly and reminds you what music feels like. One who curses the government under his breath and reminds you that even those holding the keys don't always believe in the cell. And the cruel ones? You memorize their footsteps. You know when they are coming by the tempo of their stride. You hold your breath when their key touches the lock. Food comes eventually, always late, always bland, bread with hard edges, watery stew with something floating in it that may have once been meat. If you're lucky, a slice of apple. If not, a beet that tastes like earth. Hunger becomes a constant, but not the worst thing. The worst thing is still the damp, the slow crawl of moisture along your skin. It makes you feel like you're dissolving day by day. Cold without wind, wet without rain. Some men lose their teeth. Others scratch until they bleed. You count each crumb you're given like it's gold, and you hide crusts under your shirt, as though tomorrow might forget to arrive. Sometimes, late at night, the others sleep, and you lie awake and listen. The fortress breathes. You swear it does. Wooden beams settle, pipes groan, iron creaks. There's a rhythm to it all, a language you can almost understand if you stay silent long enough. The Bastille isn't haunted by ghosts. It is the ghost. And you, unfortunately, are inside it. The sounds become your lullaby. The scrape of metal, the hush of wind through cracks. They are your choir now. You close your eyes, not to sleep, but to pretend. Still, even the worst of rooms sometimes offer moments. One morning, light filters in just right through a crack in the wall, and you see dust dancing like gold in the beam. One evening, the rain hammers the tower so hard that it sounds like applause. A rat curls beside your foot, not biting, just sleeping. These scraps, tiny, pathetic, human, are what you hoard, not as comfort, but as proof that something of you remains. The others sleep. The guards change, the chains rust, but you are still here. You breathe. You remember. You wait. Next, we'll visit a prisoner who found a way to fight that silence. A man whose mind didn't wither in the cold, but bloomed. Who wrote through the cracks. Who transformed a cell into a stage and reshaped how France would remember its cages. If you were lucky, or wealthy, or well-connected, or just persistent enough, your time in the Bastille might have looked a little different. The chains would still be there, the guards still armed, the stones still cold, but there would be touches of civility. A window with shutters, a desk and chair, a fire lit on especially cold days, and above all, a servant. Not your own servant, of course, but one assigned by the prison. Someone paid in coins or favors to carry messages, sweep the floors, and sometimes, very quietly, deliver more than just water and bread. Your servant is often younger than you'd like, and more curious than you'd prefer. He doesn't speak unless spoken to, but his eyes scan everything. He notices what you read, if you're allowed books. He watches what you write, if you're permitted paper. And if you do happen to write something, anything, he knows whether you fold it neatly and tuck it under your bed, or if you hide it in the lining of your coat. He knows because he's the one who might pass it along. Letters from the Bastille are not like letters from anywhere else. They don't go through the post. They don't wear seals. They don't travel openly. They are slipped, smuggled, hidden between shirt buttons, or inside hollowed loaves of bread. And they are dangerous. A wrong word in the wrong ear could see your rations cut, your privileges revoked, or your sentence silently extended. A letter discovered in your cell could be read aloud by a governor with a sneer. Worse, it could never be acknowledged at all, just taken, disappeared, and answered with silence. But people try anyway. There's something about confinement that stokes the need to be heard. You write because you need to tell someone, anyone, that you are still here, that you haven't vanished entirely. Some men write to family, some to lawyers, some to mistresses long forgotten by everyone but them. Others write to the king himself. These letters are not always coherent. They're often desperate, repetitive, or half delusional. But they are real, and they speak to something no cell can crush, the stubborn human hope that someone is still listening. And then there are the bribes. They take many forms. A coin tucked under a dish, a promise whispered behind a door, a favor owed by someone on the outside, exchanged for a look the other way. In the Bastille, nothing is entirely secure. Money buys parchment. Money buys ink. Money buys books that haven't been blacked out or censored. Money buys silence. And sometimes, money buys noise. The kind of noise that gets a letter delivered, a complaint acknowledged, or a prisoner quietly moved to a better room. Your servant is your lifeline and your liability. If he likes you, he might clean your cell a little better, bring you food that's only 1 day old, or warm your water before handing it over. If he dislikes you, he'll find your chamber pot still full, your blankets damp, your food clearly tampered with. You might overhear him laughing with the guards, or worse, hear nothing at all and wonder what's being said behind your back. Some servants act like shadows, silent, dutiful, and forgettable. Others are bold, cheeky even, offering little comments and dry humor, a splash of color in the gray monotony of prison life. Some are far too clever for their station and know exactly how much influence they hold. They can read your moods better than you can. They can tell when you've lost hope before you do. And some of them, just a few, will take your words, carry them past the guards, and never bring back a reply. It's a gamble, really. You never know whether your letter reached its destination. Sometimes you get a reply, but the handwriting isn't familiar. It's stiff, formal, and unsigned. A message couched in pleasantries, offering nothing concrete. Other times, you get silence. Not even the soft kind, but a wall of indifference that seems to stretch all the way to Versailles. And still you write. Not because it works, but because it's something to do. A form of rebellion in black ink. Occasionally, news flows the other way. Your servant, cleaning your room, might let slip a detail. The queen has taken ill. A nobleman has fallen from favor. There's unrest in the provinces. These tidbits are treasures. They remind you that the world is still turning, even if you've been left off the map. You hold on to them like charms, repeating them in your head until they feel like evidence that the sun still rises. Sometimes the letters are not written by you. Sometimes they're written about you. A warden may draft a report. Prisoner quiet, eats little, writes often, complains of damp. That report might go to a minister or to a desk in the king's household. It might be read, or it might join a stack of similar reports, yellowing in some drawer. Or it might be sent to your enemy, if you have one, with a note. Still alive, still quiet. And that enemy, somewhere in silk and perfume, might smile. You start to wonder what your reputation is beyond the cell. Are you a name on a list? A ghost story? A problem no one wants to solve? Does anyone believe you're guilty of anything? Does anyone remember your name at all? The servant never says, but he knows more than he lets on. Maybe he knows that someone asked about you once. Maybe he knows they were told never to ask again. The bureaucracy of imprisonment becomes its own maze. A request for warmer clothes takes 3 weeks. A request for writing paper is denied without explanation. A complaint about your mattress results in a colder one. There's no logic. There's only the rhythm of waiting, of asking, of hoping that somewhere, some piece of you will slip past the walls. And all the while, the letters pile up. Some are finished, others half written. Some are just folded thoughts, pages where you talk to yourself, because there's no one else. They're tucked into the lining of your coat, hidden beneath a loose brick, or burned one letter at a time in the fire, just to prove you had the courage to say something, even if no one heard. Next, we'll meet a prisoner who did more than write. He performed, he provoked. He transformed the act of confinement into spectacle and scandal. You tend to think of the guards as a single blur, keys, boots, orders, barked or muttered. But that's only part of the picture. The Bastille's jailers are not simply uniformed shadows moving between cells. They are people tangled in their own mess of allegiances, ambitions, and careful silences. Some believe in the crown, some believe in nothing at all, and a rare few quietly believe in you, though they'd never admit it. Your main jailer isn't some faceless brute. He's a man with a face weathered by cold mornings, a jaw set like stone, and a limp in one leg that makes him lean ever so slightly when he walks. He's called Marais or Gautier, or perhaps something even plainer. He carries your meals, signs your reports, and nods once when you say thank you. But there's more behind that nod than duty. He's watching you, not in the cruel way, not like he wants you to fail, more like he's waiting for something, for you to crack, or maybe just for his shift to end. His uniform is always neat, but his hands are scarred. Not soldier scars, something older, more domestic. Maybe he's to be a smith, or a butcher, or a father. You don't ask. He doesn't tell. But one day, while sliding your bread through the hatch, he mumbles a line from a poem. Not a popular one. Something obscure. You blink. He shrugs. My mother liked it, he says, and that's the end of that. Another jailer hums. Every night, same tune. It's not cheerful, but it's steady. And in the dark, that counts for something. You ask what it is, and he shrugs, says he doesn't know. Says he heard it from his father, who heard it from a man who died in prison. Then he walks away, humming it again. Some guards keep journals. You know this not because you've seen them, but because once, a page was left behind, folded, crumpled, but unmistakable. A description of a prisoner, not yours. Someone from another floor. A line caught your eye. He dreams with his eyes open. I think he used to be a writer. You wonder what's written about you. Writes too much. Stares at the wall, still breathing. A few of them drink on duty, quietly. Not enough to stumble, but enough that their breath changes and their voices soften. One, in particular, likes to talk when he's had a swallow of wine. He tells stories of other prisons, other prisoners. He never uses names. But you get the sense he's not just passing time. He's remembering. Sometimes his stories slip too close to confession. I once locked a man up for something he didn't do, he says. Then he laughs, shrugs, and adds, he was annoying, though. It's in these moments, small and half-formed, that you realize how much they carry. These guards aren't just custodians of your sentence. They're part of it. Some of them have seen dozens of men like you. Noblemen, writers, traitors, scapegoats. Some have watched prisoners come and go. Others waste away to shadows. And through it all, they've never once been asked what they think. Because no one cares what a jailer feels. But they do feel. They carry your stories even when they pretend not to. One slips a book through your hatch without a word. Another finds you a better blanket on a bitter night. One adjusts your window so the breeze comes through just right at dusk. None of it is recorded. None of it is allowed. But all of it matters. You catch them looking at you sometimes. Not cruelly. Curiously. Like they're wondering why you're here. Who you really are. Maybe they've heard the rumors. Maybe they've made up their own. Maybe you're the bastard of a minister. Maybe a foreign spy. Maybe the king's twin. Maybe nobody. They'll never ask. But they'll keep watching. One jailer carries a locket. You see it when he bends to pick up something he dropped. Inside is a sketch of a girl with a crooked smile. You say nothing. But after that, he treats you more kindly. Not warmly, but with care. As if remembering that somewhere beyond the walls, someone once smiled at him. Then there are those who hate their jobs, deeply, visibly. They drag their feet, slam the doors, spit when no one's looking. They hate the prisoners, yes, but more than that, they hate the orders. The lack of purpose. The way the stone presses into them, too. Some of them talk about retirement, about fishing, about vineyards they'll never buy. They dream just like you do, only with slightly more sunlight. And then there are the dangerous ones, the ones who enjoy it, who linger too long outside the cell, who smile when they turn the key. You learn their patterns fast and avoid them whenever you can. Some seem eager for you to act out, just so they have a reason to respond. You keep your voice low. You keep your requests clear. You remind yourself that they are still men, but you don't forget that some men like the cage more than the key. Over time, a strange intimacy forms. You know the guards better than you know yourself. You can tell who limps, who sighs before speaking, who clears his throat twice before asking a question. You learn their rhythms, and they, in turn, learn yours. It's not friendship. It's not even sympathy. It's proximity, the kind that binds without warmth. One day, one of the old ones disappears. You're not told why. No one is, but the routine changes. The footsteps at dawn are different. The bread is colder. The door sticks. A new face replaces the old one, and the balance shifts slightly. You grieve more than you expect. Not for the man, but for the stability he represented. In a place like this, even the smallest constants are anchors. Eventually, you start to realize that the guards are prisoners too. Not literally, not in chains. But they're stuck here, inside these same walls, under the same watchful silence. They serve sentences of decades too, just measured in wages instead of years. And while they walk home at night, their keys jangling like medals, a part of them never leaves the cell blocks behind. Even the walls seem to know this. The way their voices echo differently. The way the floor groans beneath their boots. You begin to wonder who the Bastille really belongs to. The prisoners locked behind its doors, or the ones carrying the keys who'll never truly escape. Somewhere in another wing, the cell door creaks open to a man who will soon change everything. He doesn't look like a revolutionary. Not yet. But he carries ink in his blood and a sharpness in his voice that no silence can smother. The prison hasn't met someone like him before. It doesn't come all at once. The end arrives like rust on iron, slow, quiet, and everywhere. At first, you notice it in the shifting expressions of the guards. They're whispering more, carrying themselves differently. One forgets to lock your door. Another offers you food without the usual scowl. Something beyond the stone is changing, and though no one says the word, you begin to feel it in the marrow of the building. Revolution. Outside, the storm gathers with ink-thick clouds of ideas and desperation. You don't see it, of course. You only hear rumors, smuggled in like contraband, that the people are angry, that bread costs more than most can earn, that the nobles are fleeing, and the king pretends not to notice the gathering roar. But in here, within these fortress walls, nothing appears different. The keys still turn. The stew is still thin. The rain still seeps through the roof like clockwork. Yet the quiet holds its breath. And then one day, the silence breaks. You wake to shouting. Not the usual grumbles from a sick cellmate, or the bark of a new recruit trying to show off. This is louder, deeper, the sound of a city moving in anger, boots on cobblestones. Steel scraping steel. A cannon, maybe, or something close to it, shuddering through the bones of the tower. You press your ear to the wall, and the fortress trembles. The guards don't shout orders this time. They hesitate. One runs past, pale and panting, carrying nothing. No weapons, no food, just flight. Another stays at his post, but looks as if he expects the ground to open beneath him. You catch his eye through the cell grate. He doesn't blink, just mutters, "They've come." Then he's gone, and your breath starts to fog the stone. The Bastille has always been a place of power, cold, rigid, immovable. And yet now, it sways. You feel it not in the walls, but in the space between them, in the tension of every iron hinge and every wooden beam. Screams echo. Not the tortured kind, the free kind. The kind that rips up from lungs that have held too much silence. You don't know whether to be afraid or hopeful. Maybe both. Because this noise, for all its chaos, feels like truth. A gunshot rings out, somewhere close, then another, and a roar that doesn't fade. The cell beside yours empties. Its door flung open, hinges still shrieking. You hear footsteps, not boots, but shoes. Civilian, stumbling, running. The inmates are being released, or they're escaping, or perhaps they're just being abandoned. You don't know which. You wait. You clutch the wall. You hold your breath, and then your door opens. It doesn't creak like in stories. It moans, heavy and reluctant, as if the stone itself protests. A man stands there. Not a guard, not a soldier. Just a face you don't recognize, eyes wide, holding a ring of keys that jangles like defiance. He doesn't speak. He just nods once and turns away. You step into the corridor. For a moment, your knees buckle. The light feels wrong. The air tastes of smoke and dust and something else, freedom. There's no one to stop you, but there's also no one to guide you. You pass cells flung open, empty or echoing with laughter. You hear someone sobbing thanks to no one in particular. A man on the stairs is kissing the wall like it's a lover he thought long dead. You pass through halls that once held only fear. You walk beneath banners of dust. You see names scratched into stone, some new, some old, some carved in rage. There's a smell of gunpowder and ash, mingled with sweat and something far older, hope, perhaps, rotting, but not yet dead. You find your way to the main gate, or what used to be the main gate. It's splintered, smashed open by something larger than just a cannon. The people did this. Not kings, not generals. People. They swarmed the fortress like it was an infection and tore it down brick by brick. You step through the opening, blinking into the sun. You expect applause. You expect silence. What you get is noise, cheering, crying, the mad pulse of the city waking up from a nightmare. The Bastille begins to fall, not all at once, but steadily. Stones removed as trophies. Walls broken for their symbolism. No one mourns it, not really. It is remembered in pieces, each fragment a tale, each scrap a warning. Some of the cells are documented, some erased. Some remain beneath the streets of Paris, ignored by footsteps that will never know their weight. You walk uncertain. No name, no title, just a body moving forward in clothes too old for the world outside. You hear snatches of new words, liberté, eagle-light, fraternit, and they sound like fiction. But fiction you want to believe in. Later, long after the fortress has been reduced to ruin, the stories will begin. Stories of noble martyrs and secret prisoners and keys, passed from hand to hand like relics. Your name might appear in one of them, or it might vanish entirely. You'll become a detail, a rumor, a ghost with a page. And somewhere behind you, the last gasp of the Bastille sinks into rubble and dust. It will be remembered as the beginning of something. A fire sparked by forgotten kindling. A prison that became a metaphor. A symbol of everything the people wanted to destroy, and everything they now dared to build. The dust hasn't even settled yet, and already the storytellers are sharpening their pens. They'll write about what it meant, what it symbolized. But buried beneath all the noise, somewhere between legend and record, the voices of the real prisoners still linger, yours among them. The stones are scattered, the guards have fled, and the Bastille's long silence has finally broken. It leaves behind questions, echoes, and ruins. And now, with the walls crumbled and the last chain rusting in the sunlight, it's time to slow down, to step back, and to let the hush return. Not the enforced silence of imprisonment, but the soft quiet of a world at rest. Let's allow the noise to fade behind us as we drift gently into our final thoughts. And that's where we'll leave it for tonight. From a hidden cell deep beneath the Bastille to the murmurs of guards who carried their own quiet burdens. From velvet masks to vanished names. From stone walls that heard everything but revealed nothing, to the final collapse of a prison that became a symbol for so much more. A long, slow walk through the hollow corridors of secrecy and silence, and the fragile memories that still echo through the dust. If you're still awake, thanks for sticking with me all the way to the end. And if you drifted off somewhere between the jangling keys and the shifting shadows of Paris, that's perfectly fine too. That's kind of the whole point. If you enjoyed this slower, sleep-friendly dive into history, feel free to like the video and subscribe for more. And as always, let me know in the comments where you're listening from and what time it was when you pressed play. It's always nice seeing where in the world these late-night history journeys are reaching. For now, I'll let the echoes in the stone fade, the candlelight flicker out behind the cell doors, and the iron masks slip back into mystery. Sleep well, and I'll see you next time.